If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
With the recent rise in UFO sightings, share your scariest alien encounters, UFO experiences, or eerie abduction stories that happened in the woods, forests, or other outdoor settings and gave you chills.
When I was a teenager, I saw a lot of UFOs. I have always lived in the middle of nowhere, woods near Princeton, and a lot of times as a teenager, when I went outside to smoke at night, I'd often see strange discs floating in the sky. Before I even started smoking, I'd sit there slightly afraid but too interested to look away and light up while I'd watch these discs fly in strange patterns no plane I know of could possibly maneuver in, including going straight up or down without moving forwards or backwards at all and hovering still in the air. Whenever they'd disappear, they would suspend in the air completely for a few seconds, then suddenly be gone in an instant with a flash of light and a smoke trail behind them. The weirdest instance is when I saw two of them flying in strange circular patterns around each other slowly for some reason that got me paranoid, and I literally put my bowl out after one hit and went inside. The most terrifying thing I ever saw was a creature I saw in my backyard through the sliding glass door. I was on a ton of acid at the time, so I was fully ready to write it off as nothing but a hallucination, but as I was staring at it, my sister, who was completely sober, came up to me and started screaming at the top of her lungs and pointing at the creature, screaming, "Holy duck! What is that thing?" she exclaimed. Then she described pretty much the same thing I saw. It's hard to describe because it wasn't like a Bigfoot, but the best way I can describe it is, it looked like a slightly more humanoid cat that was addicted to crack, standing on its hind legs and walking on two legs, with no fur except these large fluffy puff-outs right around its wrists and ankles. It was all white with massive black eyes. Then we saw it sprint into my neighbor's yard on its hind legs still, and to make things worse, we got a panicked call from my neighbor later asking if we'd seen the bizarre cat alien thing, so I know for sure it wasn't just a hallucination. I don't know what the hell that thing was, or what it would even be called, or if it was an animal or a chupacabra or an alien or some shit, I don't know, but the image of it is still hard burned into my mind years later, and it scared the shit out of me. My childhood encounter still haunts me. I had a very close encounter with what I believe was an alien. I was about 9 or 10, playing in my friend's backyard, which happened to be a forest. The four of us were playing games in the forest and decided to take a break. We all gathered around a couple of fallen trees to hang out when suddenly, from behind a tree no more than 6 to 7 feet in front of me, a tall, dark creature poked its head out. I very briefly made eye contact with it. At least, it felt as though I was looking directly into its eyes. I couldn't actually see the eyes, as the creature was very dark. I turned to look at one of my friends, who had also noticed this creature. Without saying a word to each other, we bolted from the forest and into his house. The other two friends followed us closely, not realizing what we had just experienced. This experience still haunts me to this day. I still lose sleep over it nearly 20 years later. I lost touch with the friends I was with that day, but I did contact the one who also saw the creature a couple of years ago just to get his thoughts. He pretty much remembers the exact same thing. I wish there was a group I could join or a therapist that wouldn't think I'm totally crazy. I feel like that experience has played a significant role in my life. I'm still searching for answers and would love to chat with others who have similar experiences. I need to know I'm not alone in feeling consumed by my experience 20 years ago. Help? I think I saw some aliens? If you don't believe me, I don't care. I'm so scared, and I think I need to be mentally evaluated. My dog was barking at our backyard fence for no reason, so I went out and checked it out. As soon as I managed to get him inside, 3 small, blurry objects emerged from the trees and abruptly became visible. There were 3 aliens that were as tall as Oompa Loompas. They were skinny, so skinny, almost like walking sticks with a square-shaped figure. They had a binocular-shaped eye ridge, and they had yellow eyes that were sunken in and looked slanted. I was trying to run, but I fell on the ground. They stared at me and did a dance. They swung one hand in the air in a circle and swayed side to side by lifting their feet up to their neck. Once they did this dance, that walked back into the trees. My family thinks I'm insane. I'm absolutely shocked none of them believe me. I am terrified. I'm in my room crying right now. No one is taking me seriously, and I feel so embarrassed and ashamed for telling them what I saw. Found alien-like creature while camping. I can't remember exactly how old I was, but I was probably somewhere between 6 and 9 years old. My sister, my dad, and I were camping at an established campsite right next to a river in Idaho. We have been to that exact spot many times before, but I have never seen anybody nearby or even a car go by on the single-lane road. I am 15 years old now, but I can still remember the campsite so vividly. Anyways, it was our last night there, and it was getting dark. My sister and I thought we would walk along the river while my dad was at the campsite. We walked a bit and decided to turn back. We were probably about 100 yards away from the campsite when we saw what still haunts me to this day and was the most terrifying unexplainable thing that ever happened to me. On a huge, old tree stump stood a terrifying blue and slightly furry creature with frizzy hair on its head that stood on two legs. It was probably about 2 feet tall. I didn't get too good of a glimpse of it before my sister and I were both screaming at the top of our lungs back to the campsite. I barely even opened my eyes for the rest of the time we were there, but my dad didn't seem to believe our story, so we had to sleep the night at the campsite. We left the next day, and I was still terrified. To this day I still have no idea what that creature was, but the craziest part is that my sister and I both saw it. If you know anything about this or have similar stories, please share in the comments. I had a pretty insane sighting with my best friend back in April. We were on the way back to my house from work that night, so we were sober, and as we were pulling up towards my neighborhood, there was this huge triangular craft just hovering there about 200 or 300 feet up. It was easily much larger than any military aircraft I've seen take off from the base, and it had a blinding white light in each corner. My friend and I both noticed it at the same time, and there was quite a bit of "what the duck is that?" talk between us. We slowed down a little and continued to approach it, and as we got closer, it started to move away from us. The closer we got, the faster it sped up until it took off at breakneck speed towards JT, slightly changed direction, and flew off into the empty desert. The craziest thing to me about this whole encounter of ours was that the object made absolutely no noise and left no contrail, which both would have been noticeable as it was a clear, quiet desert night with a full moon. My friend and I still mention it to each other at least once a month to make sure the details stay straight. I saw a UFO in the woods when I was in 7th grade. One morning when I was in 7th grade, about age 12 back in 2003, I was waiting for the bus with my neighbor, who was 17 at the time. We lived in a heavily wooded area in Michigan. We stood in her driveway, which was long and winding through the woods so you couldn't see her house. Even though it was an early morning, it marked the start of the school year, a time when daylight reaches its peak very early. We were standing there talking, facing the road as usual, when something caught my peripheral vision. It was a small, round, saucer-shaped object, about the size of a large dinner plate. It was gray and had 2 small lights on the edge, one yellow and one orange. The lights faced us the entire time. It was very close to us, maybe 10 to 20 feet? And to the side of the driveway, still in the woods. It started gliding very slowly across the driveway. I remember being so petrified my neighbor and I were clutching each other's arms. It continued to the other side of the driveway and back into the woods on that side. It picked up speed and glided through the trees. It made absolutely no sound. It was completely silent. If I hadn't caught a glimpse of it, I might have been unaware of its presence. It continues through the trees effortlessly and swiftly until we saw it going through the woods and toward the road. It then glided out of the woods and floated in the middle of the road. Somehow there were no vehicles or people around anywhere. It stayed there for a few seconds, and then it shot into the sky with such speed I've never witnessed before or again in my life. If I had blinked, I would have missed it flying so fast until it was a tiny black speck in the sky. The bus then turned down our road and picked us up. I told people, but of course, being 12 and my neighbor 17, nobody believed us. Now that I'm older, so is my neighbor. We keep in touch and still talk about the object we saw. She also told me that she saw it twice more after that near her house. When she got her first car, it blocked her from going up her driveway one night, and another night she saw it hovering in a ditch. My family finally started believing me after so many years of us telling the same story. I have no idea what it was or where it came from. Our military? Aliens? I'll probably never know, and honestly I'm not sure if I want to. I'd be happy to never see the thing again. Mind you, this was during a time when drones weren't really a thing yet, especially not ones that silent or that fast. Had it not shot up to the sky at the speed of light, I may have been able to attribute it to something understandable, but no way. I'm also not really convinced that even our military has the capability to build something that can move that fast. If we had that kind of technology, I feel like we would have much more advanced things than just smartphones and cars that run on gas. Maybe I'm wrong, but if anyone has seen anything similar or has any sort of explanation, please share. This is something I have thought about over and over since age 12. My camping trip has a weird ending. So this happened about 2 years ago now, and I'm a bit more in the I want to believe than I believe, but my dad kind of sold this one for me. So, I and my dad are outside with a family friend in northern Minnesota, surrounded by woods, and just chilling outside our RV at this RV park. We've got a dying fire and are about to head inside when I notice something in the sky. I'd been looking at the stars since they were so much easier to see out north. I pointed out to my dad, and we both look up as this thing moves across the sky. It was circular and orange like a low-heat fire. It appeared to be headed towards us, if a little to the left, not sure what direction it'd be. We all three start thinking about what it is. My dad is a pilot, and I'm in ground school at the time, so we think it might be a plane but shoot the idea down. Maybe a meteor, and we all kind of agree that's what it is. When the thing changes direction. If I remember right, the thing stops for a few seconds before going straight off to the left of us, flying away. It disappears. We were all three stumped and to this day have no idea what it was. My mom still doesn't believe we saw anything. See, the thing is, my dad was raised on the farm, the oldest of 7, and a religious Catholic. He's a mechanical engineer and altogether a no-nonsense guy, but even he just gets weirded out thinking back on the event. So anyways, that's my story of the UFO I saw on a camping trip. Any explanations would be appreciated. Carl Sagan in the Dark Forest. The first I heard about Carl Sagan was that he desperately wanted aliens to visit us. This desire was so strong that he included a map of Earth on the Voyager spacecraft. The first I heard about the dark forest hypothesis, it was explained as a reason why we don't see signs of extraterrestrial life. The universe is so scared, since admitting you exist is admitting that there's resources useful to life where you are. So all life stays quiet. I wonder, did Carl Sagan ever think about this hypothesis? What did he say about it? I personally find it so very depressing. Sagan is such a positive person, I imagine he'd have something to say that was uplifting on the subject. P.S. I'm not sure if this is the right place for it. Is it? Like a year ago, I got into a fight with my family in the Yucca Mesa area and took off on foot with my 2 dogs headed toward my friend's house in Paradise. Although I was experiencing emotional distress, I was not under the influence of drugs. But as I was walking, in the corner of my eye, I kept seeing an owl with luminescent blue eyes, and I saw it like a lot. I remember it was like beautiful geometric, and I also remember feeling peaceful when I did see it. I and my dogs ended up getting to the park in Paradise at like 2 a.m. for some, and it was so cold, me and my dogs were all huddling on the jungle gym when all of a sudden I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I knew it was something real because both of my dogs perked up as if they saw it too. I looked up and saw 2 dog figures, and once I saw them, they started running into the desert, but both disappeared in thin air after like 2 steps. That incident triggered a frantic sense of being under surveillance. Between feeling anxious and questioning reality, I just grabbed the leash of my shepherd that was a flight risk because he seemed like he was going to take off after the things I had just seen disappear like he was still seeing them. All of this happened, and I look up, and shit you not, I see a flying saucer. But not like big and shooting in from outer space. No, it was just there all of a sudden, and from where I was, it looked like the size of a shoebox. I went to my friend's house, like a street away, with both my dogs, but he didn't answer, and I needed water for my dogs, so I walked back to my house I had just come from in the first place. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear I'm not lying or exaggerating shit. I was fighting a lot with my family that week or so and ended up just taking off on walks, and I saw the little saucers again and the owl again but never the dogs again. That was a first and last. I also remember thoughts just seemed foreign when the UFO was there, and I just wanted to be with my mom, but I thought they would follow me to her.
DBH, I don't know what to make of the whole thing, but this is the first time I talked about it because A, I wasn't on drugs, and B, I'm not crazy.
My camping trip. This happened many years ago, but it will stick with me forever. I was around 15 years old. 2005. My family and I went on a camping trip to Lake Fairfax in Virginia. It was a clear, sunny day with very few clouds, and there were many other groups of people there. There were numerous other families and Boy Scout troops present. My 3 brothers and I played all day until nightfall. As my father was grilling up some supper, I noticed how cool the smoke looked as it floated to the sky. Then, I saw something I've never witnessed before. Lights. Everywhere. There were hundreds of them. I thought they were stars for a split second, but that quickly changed when I realized these lights were traveling in formations. 2 of them would fly one way, and 10 would fly the other way. Some flew solo, and some flew in giant groups. I told my brothers to look up, and they saw the same thing. I tried to point my parents' attention to the sky, but they shrugged it off and said it was normal. They saw similar lights growing up in Chile. I knew it wasn't normal. Later on, when it was completely dark and everyone retreated to their tents, I still had those lights on my mind. I couldn't believe the reality of what I was witnessing. I sat there awake while my girlfriend slept next to me and the rest of my family slept in their tents. And then I started hearing the noises. The most unearthly noises I've ever heard in my life. It sounded like a language I've never heard coming from a creature I've never seen. The instant I heard the sound, the hairs on my neck shot up, and I was frozen with fear. I'm getting goosebumps just typing this out. Then I heard the sounds coming from another part of the field everyone was camping out on. Then another. And another. There were a lot of them, and they were walking around. The crunches of leaves under their feet made me think that they had 2 legs like a human. But the sound coming from them was far from it. And it sounded like they were communicating with each other because every time one spoke or screeched or whatever they did, another would do the same back but would say different words. When I realized to some degree what was happening outside my tent, I grabbed the zippers and held on to them for dear life. I didn't want what I was hearing to open the door of my tent and have to see what they were. What troubled me the most was that when I did that, I had a voice in my head telling me that if I opened the door and saw what was out there, I would have to go with them. That sent shockwaves of terror through my body. I can't explain what voice I was hearing, but it wasn't mine, and it sounded like awful news. I held on to those zippers for the entire night, about 10 hours, and didn't let go until I didn't hear the noises for an hour. When the sun came out and I started to hear the other campers talking amongst themselves, I opened my tent. There was no sign of anything. I told my girlfriend about it, but she wasn't the smartest person in the world, so she brushed it off as a horrible dream. I was not dreaming. I didn't want to mention it to my younger brothers because we were staying another night, and I didn't want to spook them. The following night I took one of my girlfriend's sleeping pills and went to sleep before the sun was down. I don't know what I experienced, but I know it was real, and I know it was completely unusual. I consider myself a realist and don't believe things too much unless provided with substantial evidence. I have never witnessed a ghost or an alien. But I believe that something out of this world visited us that night. It's been on my mind ever since it happened, and I needed to share my story. Back around 2010, my wife and I, GF at the time, went camping in a field on my family's farm. I recall waking up around 1 in the morning to take a shower. The tent we were in had a mesh screen, like most tents do. When I glanced out, I saw something rather wild. I can best describe it as a disc, stereotypical right, on the thicker side, but not as thick as a football. I want to say it had a small top to it. It had multiple color lights on the bottom. The bottom was spinning in response to the lights. The spinning wasn't very fast, it had a wobble to it. It moved and spun left, right, and then descended below the tree line out of my visibility. This happened in, like, a span of 10 seconds. I even woke my wife up after it happened and told her. I had no regrets and told everyone in my friend and family group after it happened. This happened in the Shenandoah Valley. No, I wasn't on drugs. No, it wasn't a drone. I actually fly drones now. I'm not one to believe everything I see in the sky is an alien. We actually live on the farm in front of where I saw this now, so I'm used to being able to look out at night and see planes, satellites, and stars everywhere. The only instance in my life in which I have observed something as peculiar as this. And I wish I could see it again. I'm looking for similar stories about an object like that. It would be interesting to find someone who might have witnessed it. It wasn't super far away, but it was close enough that I could see each individual light on it. UFO sighting, Flat Rock area. I've kept this story hidden for some time because my family doesn't believe me, and my friends think I'm crazy. About a year and a half ago, my friend and I were driving down to Cayuga because I had to drop him off after we were done hanging out. Usually driving through Cayuga, it can get pretty eerie or just feel weird if you're the only car on the road. We had the windows down and were jamming to some music when I saw a bright light come on out of the woods. I figured it was a porch light because it's common for people in the area to have powerful lights, even multiple LEDs. I mean, we live in the woods, so I didn't really pay it any mind. Out of the corner of my eye, the light that I thought was a porch light started rising. I looked quickly, and a 3-dimensional triangular metal object with 3 white/yellow, off-white, I guess, lights on each end with a glowing orb in the center, which I figured was its gravitational device, was floating over me. The fear I had in me was a fear I can't explain. In that moment, I genuinely didn't know what to think. All the stories, movies, and things I saw or heard growing up, it felt like I was dreaming. I started to call my friend to look at pulling the sunroof back to make sure I wasn't tweaking, and sure enough, it was floating over us. The detail in the orb that was making it have zero gravity looked inexplicable. It was like a virtual ocean wave of thick mist changing from violet to blue to cyan, but at the same time almost looking digital, if that makes any sense. We instantly pulled out our phones to record as it just kept on floating higher and higher. It was 3x the size of my car, and at the time I drove a 2004 Honda Civic. It didn't do anything to us but just float away. I sent the video to a few of my friends on Snap, but a week later, Snap got deleted, and I've lost all the footage I had. Me and my friend aren't in touch, and last I asked, he said he didn't have the footage anymore of it. I sound crazy, but it genuinely happened. Some days I'll drive down Cayuga late at night in hopes I'll see it again. If anyone has seen anything strange in Cayuga like this, let me know, or if anyone has seen any triangular ship similar in Asheville or around the area, please. An alien-like creature chased my brother and friends out of the woods. Scotland, UK. So this seems to be the right place to tell of this incident that happened about 8 years ago now. I am writing this on behalf of my brother, who was present that night. I promise this is true, so I'm sharing here to get feedback on my brother's experience. Any ideas or similar experiences, etc., would be greatly appreciated. My brother and his friends were walking back home through the woods when they all heard a snap of a branch. They turned around and saw a silhouette of a person on top of the hill 100 meters from where they had just walked down. They watched it as it quickly tried to hide behind a tree. They all said yes. When my brother and his friends asked if they had seen that. As they all continued to stare, my brother's eyes finally managed to focus in the difficult lighting, as it was nighttime and dark. He then described that he could see a head peeking from behind the tree, but in an unusual way. The head appeared to be tall and moved in a unique manner. This is when it gets terrifying. The thing steps out from the tree completely and stands at the top of the hill, almost as if it decides, I've been seen. I need to do something, type of attitude. The attitude was akin to a fight or flight response. My brother said that this is when the overwhelming fear kicked in because they could all see now that the builder of this thing couldn't be a person. He described it as being tall, with a skinny waist, gangly, long arms, and having your typical alien-shaped head. And now to make things even worse, the thing starts to charge down the hill and into the field surrounded by trees where my brother and his friends are. He also said that the pace of the creature was definitely not human as it gained ground very quickly. So obviously my brother and his friends turned tail and began to run for what it felt like, their lives. He did not want to turn around and look as he was completely focused on getting away. My brother said that as they were running, he could hear it stumble now and again, and he could also hear the footsteps gaining on them, giving him a good idea of the pace of this thing, which he emphasized on how scary it was. As they approach the village, they come to the end of the field where a street lamp glows onto the edge of the field. He said once they got into the light, the creature came to an abrupt stop, as if it was scared of the light or that it did not want to be completely revealed. My brother and his friends kept running until they got home. I asked my brother's friends about the incident, and they all still express how scary it was. My brother and I love wild camping. Once, the night before the day we were going to go camping, we stupidly began to talk of that night. We ended up not going camping because we creeped each other out so badly that we feared we might see the creature again whilst camping. I am ex-military, so as you know, I have done my fair share of sleeping and camping in the woods. That's how scary this is to us. The level of detail and the fear in my brother's face and voice whilst he tells me of the night reinforce the fact that it actually happened. Me telling you here does not do the story justice. So I will try to get my brother to put his experience down on paper, and I will post it here so you get the proper details. Any questions, let me know and I'll do my best to answer them. Also, if you have any idea what it was or had a similar experience, let me know too. Thank you. What were the beings I saw as a child? As a very young child, I recall, without hypnosis, that I had long conversations with little people who I considered my friends. They were almost human-looking adults but much shorter, maybe 2 feet tall, so smaller than me at the time. They had skin of a tan-orange color, which was heavily weathered and wrinkled, but their faces did not appear extremely old. They wore clothes. The one I recall the most clearly had dark hair and a short, trimmed dark beard. The nearest thing comparable to them I can think of is the dwarves of legend, but that's not quite how they looked. They were able to come in and out of my room without using the door. They connected their appearances with UFO sightings and psychic phenomena. Has anyone else had similar experiences or know who/what these creatures are? I saw an alien with my sister once as a kid. So I and my stepsister grew up together for a long period of time. When we were younger, we used to camp in New Hampshire at the Rumney Pines Christian Campground, where our families owned a few campers and a cabin. This happened about 10 years ago, maybe a little less. One night during the summertime at around 7 p.m., my stepsister and I are messing around in our grandparents' camper when it's about time to go back to our parents' camper for bed. We get outside, and the way that the campers are situated, they were perpendicular to the road in a line. At the end of the line of trailers, there's a path that continues to a bunch of old and some renovated campgrounds that were used during the summertime and the second pool. It's all dirt and mud road, and the trees are plentiful. We were walking from where the main road was towards deeper in the woods to get to our parents' camper. When we started walking, I quickly saw something far in the trees making slight movement, and so I stopped walking. Strangely enough, my stepsister stopped walking too at the exact same time, and we both said to each other, "Do you see that?" All the way at the end of the line of campers towards the left of the road leading into the woods, we saw maybe a 7 to 8 foot tall being with its head and shoulder poke out around one of the trees to look at us, stare for a couple of seconds, then slowly move back behind the tree again. It was really tall, kind of skinny, with long proportioned arms, at least its left arm. It was silver/gray with a big round head and short, set shoulders. Needless to say, we both ran into the camper and told our parents about what we saw and were told to stop asking for attention. I'm aware that a lot of people won't believe my story, but I'm sure that there will still be people who find it fascinating or may have a similar experience. I saw a triangular UFO once. It flew directly over me at night, maybe about 400 feet high. I couldn't make out the shape of the craft itself, but the white lights were in a triangular arrangement, with a blinking red light in the center. Guessing on the size of the craft, I'd say it's bigger than a fighter jet, definitely smaller than a 747, maybe around 80 to 90 feet. I've seen fighter jets in person flying low, so that's what I'm basing it off. It wasn't going particularly fast or slow, just cruising along. It finally left my line of sight as it flew beyond a tree line. I'd guess the tree line was a half-mile away. From the time it passed right above me to beyond the tree line was about 15 seconds, to give a sort of reference for speed. It wasn't until it was gone that it hit me. It didn't make a sound at all. None whatsoever, not even a hum. I would make fun of people who saw something like that and failed to get a picture or video, but it never even crossed my mind to try. I was too busy trying to figure out what I was seeing. I see Cessnas around where I work all the time, and even at a good distance, you can hear them clearly. I didn't get the feeling of it being an alien craft because of that blinking red light. I also noted that the craft didn't have the red and green lights that I thought were required by law. I live in PA, and I saw this craft while I was walking to a train at night after work, so this was at 9:30 p.m. I got home and pulled up a map, and the road I'm on faces almost perfectly southeast. If the craft stayed on its trajectory, it may have been flying towards McGuire Air Base in New Jersey. I don't know anything about McGuire, or if any weirdness has been associated with it. A friend of mine I talked to about this stuff, I didn't even tell him about it for about a week because it sounds so unbelievable. Has anybody ever seen something similar? 2 reports of cow mutilation and abduction date back to the 1800s. A farmer in 1800 sees his cows led into a dome-like mound by a group of men the size of 6-year-old children. A shepherd in 1865 sees a giant sphere and humanoid-looking monsters cut open his lost cow. From 4780 BC to 1869 AD, humanoid sighting reports were compiled by Albert Rosales. 1. Location: near Glen Rushen, Isle of Man, England. Date: 1800. Time: night. This location is said to be the place where the Glashtons settled in an invisible city. A farmer was puzzled when his cows became poor milers and always seemed worn out at dawn when he attempted to attend to them. Believing that some ne'er-do-well was harassing his herd, he staked out his barn, only to be awakened when 2 of his cows began mooing in agitation. To the amazement of the witness, they were being driven across his land into open countryside by a group of men the size of 6-year-old children. Following discreetly, he gaped in astonishment as a dome-like mound appeared on the ground ahead and the children drove his cows through a hole that opened up in the side. It was pouring light from within, and he could see what appeared to be a human in there, too, seemingly in a trance. 2. Location: Siberia, Russia, exact location not given. Date: 1865. Time: afternoon. A shepherd was looking for a lost animal from his herd when he came upon a forest glade. There he saw a giant sphere with supports and large humanoid-looking monsters. Right next to them lay his lost cow. It was dead, and its stomach was slit open, yet there was no blood anywhere in sight. The monsters bent over the animal and studied something inside it. It appeared to the witness that they were cutting something out. Some time later they noticed the young man and gestured to him in a strange fashion. Frightened, he ran away from the area. Strange hunting story. I was turkey hunting in May of 2020 in the area of Texas around Fort McCavitt, about 1 hour and a half west of San Antonio. They forgot to tell me to bring a paper copy of my license with the actual rag, so I had to drive about an hour from the ranch to the nearest town that evening to get one at a grocery store, and it was dark on the way back. Other than the 200 or more deer all over the roads I had to dodge the entire time, I actually had to just stop several times and honk at them, I had a very uneasy feeling I was being watched and thought I saw a strange light out of the corner of my eye once, but that's it. Throughout the entire journey, 2 cars passed me, indicating the remoteness of the area. I was glad to be back at the camp. The following day, I hunted from a large bush that had been transformed into a blind. I shot my bird and then left that night. The following day I got a very excited call from my guide saying something about an alien and UFO. I considered calling him back later. Cell service was beyond dismal. I texted him that evening and asked what was going on and what the call was about. I had left a decoy, so I thought that was it, but he responded by saying that after I left, he and the other ranch hand went out around dusk checking cameras and feeders, etc., and when they came over the ridge where I was hunting, they saw a big light, so they walked over the little hill and observed a UFO a few hundred feet right over the exact spot I was hunting, and then in a beam of light, they could see some type of creature moving around exactly in the area I was sitting. They said it was clearly looking through the blind, like it was looking for something. Then a beam of light came down from the craft, and it was gone. The craft zipped off. I think they said it made almost no noise or just a slight hum. He wanted to know immediately what I knew about it. I have only met the guide this one time, and I never said anything about UFOs or anything paranormal. He was a 20-something-year-old former college baseball player who barely even drank beer. I asked him why the hell he would think I would know anything about it. He said it was looking all around exactly where I had been all day and was clearly looking for something, maybe me, and they were all scared to death now thinking about quitting. Would it be coming back, etc. I had to confess to him that I had felt uneasy that previous night and that UFOs had been around me my whole life and it was probably me that somehow triggered this shit and they would be fine. Kinda made up but had to say something. I did in fact leave a call, knife, or something in the blind. But in truth, I have no abduction story, etc., but I have seen UFOs over a dozen times, and I can always sense when I am being watched by anything. He left that ranch for a better one, and we have stayed in touch, but basically about hunting stuff. He says he is now a definite believer in UFOs. What do you guys think? My encounters in Minnesota. Stillwater and Oakdale, 2009 and 2015. I'm 25 now. These 2 experiences have always left me befuddled, and I thought I would get them in writing before they get harder to recall. I'll start with my experience in 2015, as it is near concrete. The suburbs of Oakdale are a fairly safe place, so I took up running at night to stay cooler during the summer. I think I was going into my senior year of HS then. On my night run I decided to stop at a park and lie down to relax for a moment. Because I was lying down, of course I was watching the sky. That's when I heard a loud crash. As if a crane had fallen over, it sounded distant yet loud. Now this was at night, and this noise could be completely unrelated. It was, however, so loud that I have to mention it. A few minutes later, as I'm staring into the sky, I see something. The shape is clearly outlined, triangular, no lights, no sound. This object is pitch black, and I see it because it's darker than the sky. It flew steadily from the top of my vision, lying down, to the horizon. I would say it was the size of a buckle or quarter. I was shocked. I got up and booked it home while trying to process what I had just seen. 2009 experience. This experience is far more controversial. This was back when my family lived in Stillwater. It was a lovely and old house in a wooded area. I was just a kid at the time, the house itself creeped me out, and the woods did as well. To this day I just chalk it up to being a timid kid, but I still get a feeling that place wasn't right. Well, I had my own room on the 3rd floor, and it had a window. From that window there was a pine tree about 6 feet away. Well, one night I had woken up and was wandering around my room because I couldn't sleep. I decided to look out my window, and to my delight, there was an owl on the pine tree looking right at me. I would say it looked like a barn owl. It was roughly the size of an upright tackle box, if I'm not mistaken. I stared at the owl for a long time, and it was staring at me. I think the owl had just found a nice place to perch for the night. I eventually left it and went back to sleep. The next morning I told my brother excitedly about my experience. He's about 9 years older than me. His eyes went wide, and he asked me if I'd ever seen a movie called, you guessed it, The Fourth Kind. I was just a dumpy kid, of course I've never heard of it. He then explains the concept of the movie to me. How the fourth kind of contact is abduction, I think, how the aliens in the movie replace memories of their presence with owls. I was freaking out. Suffice it to say, from then on I always avoided looking out that window if I could. I never did see that owl again either. So those are my 2 encounters. I gotta say what really drives the fear in me is the thought that they could grab someone from anywhere and at any time. I am hoping for similar experiences around the Midwest. Thanks y'all. Just saw something strange. Okay, so I was just outside just now helping out with some groceries like I usually do, but I stared at the street really quickly. I don't even know why, and I saw a green-looking life form dressed in all black with no hair standing there just looking at me. I thought I was seeing things, so I continued getting the groceries out of the car, and I had chills for some reason. It wasn't there anymore, and my neighbors didn't even notice it because they were doing some yard work, but the thing is, a few minutes before, I was doing some research on aliens on here and on Google, and I saw some stuff that left me questioning everything. Which, now that I think about it, doesn't seem like a coincidence. It seems like a warning for me to stop researching this. Plus, in the past, when I was a kid in middle school, I was by myself in the living room, which had a huge window that looked out into the woods, and I saw a gray-looking life form standing there with black eyes looking at me, and when I noticed it, for some reason it looked shocked that I noticed it and disappeared. I'm pretty freaked out right now, so I don't know what that was. Can anyone explain? So to preface this, I've been unsure where exactly to share it, as what I saw baffled me, and I didn't see any craft. To get to the story, 8 years ago I moved to the Scottish borders, which is a very low population area with many remote, for UK standards, houses and farms. I worked at the time for a supermarket delivering food. I started my shift that day at 1 p.m. and finished at about 10 p.m. It was early January, so the temperature was freezing, and the sun set at about 5 p.m. This happens at about 7 p.m. I'd made a couple of deliveries and was heading into the middle of nowhere to make my next delivery. Eskdale Muir, a tiny village, was about 10 miles north of where I stood. You drive along the bottom of a valley where the road gradually rises up the side of it, so you're on top, looking down. As I got to the top of the valley in some man-made forest, I could see a light coming from inside that was intensely bright. For context, these forests are very dense with trees planted maybe 1 meter apart. Getting any sort of equipment or vehicles into these forests is impossible. There just isn't any space. I sat and stared at this light for only a few seconds. It was a constant, bright white light. I couldn't see it directly, but it was brilliant. It was coming out from between the trees. After what felt like just a few seconds, 2 rotating beams came out of the treetops. The best way I can describe what it looked like was the searchlights at the beginning of a 20th Century Fox movie. This went on for longer than just the light, but again maybe only 10 seconds or so. The light went out, and the forest was in darkness again. I waited maybe a minute to see if they would come back, but they never did. To this day I'm baffled by what I witnessed, and I hope this is the correct place to tell my story. Skinwalker Ranch. I haven't been on this channel for too long. But I've been carefully listening to people's theories and questions and books they read. But I haven't noticed a soul yet bring up Skinwalker Ranch, which seems to be the biggest hot spot for paranormal activities of all kinds. Robert Bigelow, who bought the ranch decades ago, spent millions of his own dollars studying the craziest of sightings and activities on the ranch. But since they have made a show of it on the History Channel, now I'm the first to be very skeptical of shows like this as well. But since this place has a long-term past long before the show was made, I highly believe the things these guys are finding and experiencing are happening. And they have some damning footage now of a literal UFO coming and going from this ridge. While they sat there and talked, these things flew out of the sky and around and then flew away at high speeds. Along with that, I found someone's story on here about seeing a transparent predator-like creature on their hike. And it sounded a lot like what's been happening on Skinwalker and what a Skinwalker is. Some dimensional being of sorts that seems to come in and out of some portals and dissects or eats cows, and that's invisible except through infrared. Or transparent as this person described. And these two things seem so correlated. And it got me wondering. What if aliens are not the only part of this? What if they are real, along with dimensional things they don't understand or do? Who knows? The fact is humans know so very little of what this existence is and why we are here. And spiritual stuff seems to be dying out as we go further along with technology. All the alien encounters are all saying they talk telepathically. They use touch to send feelings through humans. Maybe that's from them being one with their spirits? Being one with consciousness itself. And maybe the further we teeter towards being fully integrated with tech, the more out of touch we are becoming in that sense? And you know how they say we only use 10% of our brains? Maybe because we forgot how to use the other 90%? And that's why we're so out of touch with our spirits. And spirituality. One thing I know. Since the UFO disclosure, I have gained a deeper understanding of existence. When you realize 1. You're not superior. Matter of fact, you're inferior to many species out there. Dampens the whole specialty of humanity for me. 2. What do these creatures understand that we do not? because I couldn't imagine how much longer they would ask these same questions. Until they came far enough to answer them. 3. Everything that we do as humans seems so small in scope now. Cause for all we know, there are legit galactic affairs and wars that have happened. Compared to countries? On one planet. It doesn't compare. From what I've gathered, there are many species. Which I'm not sure makes me feel any more comfortable about it all. Would it have been better if only one? I don't know. We're not alone. And they don't seem to want to hurt us. Leaving one thing. They are either studying us, or are controlling our outcomes and playing God for whatever outcome. Which I know humans love to play God over lesser animals. So don't act like that isn't what is possible. We're cloning, creating, genetically modifying. Scientists are implanting chips into our brains to enhance our cognitive abilities. The possibilities are endless. Such confusion. Would we have been better off if they left us alone? Would they have? Are they scared they were a destructive kind? Does evil die off eventually as we evolve? Who knows? None of us will be around to find out. Unless death is something interdimensional or our souls are just a spirit. That's why people see ghosts. You cannot create or destroy energy, it can only evolve. I have seen one once in person. It had an orange/red color and was approximately 70 to 90 meters away. It wasn't very dramatic, but it was very, very real. I really don't know what the object was, but I know for sure what it wasn't. It was not an aircraft or helicopter, as it was totally silent. It was not a drone, as they didn't exist for civilians in any capacity back in the 1991-92 time frame. It was not a ground vehicle, as it was above the trees, and once it started moving, it was totally smooth. A ground vehicle in the forest would have bounced around over rocks, fallen trees, and debris on the ground. It was still for the first 30 seconds or so that I saw it, and then it started slowly moving away from me up a slight incline until it crested the top of a ridgeline and then went down the other side out of sight. It was around 2 a.m. in the morning, and there was no one else around. This happened in upstate NY, and there were no drugs or alcohol involved. Dark forest. I imagine most here are familiar with the dark forest hypothesis, which is a repetition of the Fermi paradox by Enrico Fermi, mentioned casually, in 1950, resurfacing as a response to the Drake equation from 1961. This is an equation that summarizes the concept of contemplation for the possibility of other radio-communicative life. Not their speculative abilities, just whether they have a similar means of contact. Why might this be important? Much of the discussion of the dark forest hypothesis primarily pertains to the quantifiable physical aspect of reality and concept, discussions that do not necessarily engage emotional and mental aspects that overshadow the first forest. Why would there only be one forest when there could be multiple, which we ourselves are currently engaged with among each other? Though those might be considered the principal forests, these also may be represented physically, such as by size difference and by physical capabilities. Physical capabilities, which may be rendered meaningless if another can control and command those physical capabilities without the physical entity ever being aware of it through the machinations of the mind. This is meant to express that there's more than one forest, and it may seem that the means of crossing those forests may be in the emotional one, as physical elements constitute the mind, and so is the perception given by the mind required to recognize anything that represents the physical. This may help to address what is commonly regarded as the spiritual aspect by engaging everything that's considered emotional, connecting both the physical with the mental. This is because the mind has the ability to articulate concepts in relation to what's physical and emotional, which is demonstrated through disciplines like psychology that integrate both, with the mind still demonstrated to be dependent upon a physical in order to exist in relation to our reality. What can anyone see without a means to do so in relation to something else, like the reflection of light upon an object in relation to the eyes for the brain to process, other than nothing, as there would be no means to do so, or relation to measure those means to recognize anything that exists at all. However, imagine the discrepancy represented between the two extremes of those forests. That an entity might be capable of everything physical, even like what's represented in comic books. What level of distrust might such an entity have towards another that possesses no physical ability but can potentially control every aspect of that physical ability because it can control the mind that dictates that physical ability? Who would then be scared of whom? Perhaps then they will have concern for each other's capabilities. As an example, imagine you are Superman. I hate the cliché, but know of another entity that could have controlled everything you have ever thought, believed, or known since before you were born, or even rewritten it in your mind without your knowledge at any time or instance, allowing another to manufacture your entire life. How would any physical ability compare to that? Imagine how this superhero would feel if they didn't know who they are based on whether a mind entity exists. Which would then be considered the deeper forest? Even if there existed a race that could physically destroy entire solar systems with a single person, the latter in many ways may be potentially much more frightening, as they may have only ever existed as the extension of another's will without ever knowing so. Do people imagine this to be straightforward to conceptualize? An additional illustration of conceptualization. Overconfidence might say, no problem. They then may go and challenge the idea that someone's physically 15 miles tall, no known weapon can affect them, not knowing who they are, where an accidental breath might mutilate you permanently until you suffer to death for 50 years, and accomplish nothing meaningful due to physical disability. The other way around, let someone who's 15 miles tall go into the mind of an ant with 15 million dimensions of consciousness, where to break a bone is to do so 15 million consecutive times, with sensitivities in relation to that ant that they never felt before or could ever even conceptualize due to their physical capabilities. Now, which forest is scarier? What about other forests, such as between land and water? Mammal to amphibian? Slow and fast. Young and old. Emotional and objective. Advanced and primitive. Male and female. Possible and impossible. There are many forests to cross, aren't there? Yet people won't even believe in the possible elements of reality that are right here already on Earth, described for them through the sciences or through mathematics, which we now know through historical revisions of theories have also changed upon new discoveries and mathematical proofs. So, if you don't at least believe in your own logical limitations, what do you believe in? And how can someone cross all of the forests if they can't even cross the first, such as disbelieving what you already believe to be true in terms of what humans are capable of? Many turn a blind eye to the idea that organized crime exists today, in denial that such a thing would be the exact objective for those who participate in such activities in order to not get caught by accomplishing the objective of never falling under suspicion in the first place. Now we want to believe in aliens, an idea potentially much more far-fetched, when we won't even believe in what humanity is capable of, which has already been proven throughout history, as well as today, through forensic evidence. Does this seem rational? Food for thought. It doesn't seem rational, to me, to believe in magic first in favor of mathematics, which conceptualize and make that magic possible in the first place. This is why I think if we remove the woo, profiteers and con artists, and the lies, then you'll have disclosure. Keep believing in contradictions, and then your mind is too screwed up to believe in anything other than your own contradictions, as a person in such a state by default believes in themselves, their contradictions, over the reality they exist in. Triangle UFO sighting in rural SC. My 4-month-old son woke up crying with gas around 2 a.m., so I took him to his changing table that has a clear view of the woods on the west side of my property. We own 22 acres of forest surrounding our house, and our neighbor owns at least another 20 acres of undeveloped hunting ground behind our property line. So I walk in our bathroom, and I notice a set of 3 gold lights with a central red light hovering relatively low, way too low for a plane and certainly not a satellite, over that side of the woods. The gold lights were slightly pulsating/turning maybe, and then it started flying relatively slowly over my house and out of my line of sight. I've never seen a UFO before, and I was certainly excited about it. I drew a rough sketch of what I saw in my notes app with my non-dominant hand as I rocked the baby back to sleep, and comparing it now to the triangle UFO drawn mock-ups, I am 1000% sure that's what I saw. I have memories of being abducted aboard a UFO, but by whom? I've never been brave enough to share this story online before. Please be kind/supportive in your responses and do not lash out with cruelty. I will say that when this happened, roughly 4 years ago, I wasn't lining my mind with lots of alien literature or alien movies. This wasn't a dream. And it wasn't the power of suggestion effect of the media. My soul and gut know this. What I experienced was like entering into a dimension higher than our own. It was beyond the realm of just vivid dreaming. It simply wasn't a dream. I am sure many here can relate to those who are 100% sure they have had abduction experiences that weren't fantasized or fabricated within the mind. I deeply want to get down to the bottom of who this particular group of people was. I realize there is a mirage of claimed species of ETs out there who are involved in these things. It's even said that our own government is capable of abduction scenarios. I am willing to consider both possibilities. Concisely put, the story recalled, I was brought up through my ceiling on a beam of light. For whatever reason, my body hit the ceiling, and they had trouble getting me through. They actually knocked me a few times to pull me through the ceiling. Once I was up there, I found myself slipped through the floor of a circular room. I felt drunk/drugged, as if I had had an entire bottle of whiskey. Yet, despite this sensation, my vision was better than my Earth-life vision, and I was perceiving in 4K/5K intensity. They initially brought me up to the ground of a circular room, which was purple as purple. A dark plum hue of purple. There were hallways attached to the circular room. The hallways had computer-type systems on the walls. Instead of passing out, I tried to push myself up off the floor, stomach down, my body positioned like I was doing push-ups. I looked down the hallway at the faces of the people on board. They were mostly all women, blonde, with their hair tied up above their heads to keep it out of the way, and in dark blue uniforms. I may have seen 1 or 2 men and at least 5 or 6 women. As I struggled to push myself up off the floor, I said the words, "Please, help me. Help me. Help me get up. I want to talk to you." Out of helping me, each person froze, gaping jaws hanging open, in total shock. They were all in shock that I was attempting to get up off the floor instead of passing out. It's as if they were just waiting for me to pass out. I then collapsed and do not remember anything after this. When I woke up the next morning in bed, I asked my partner if he remembered me missing. He said he slept through the whole night without waking, so really couldn't say one way or the other. How did I feel the next day? To be honest with you, utterly and hopelessly abandoned. I had the sensation that I had been abandoned by people who knew me, but I couldn't remember them. People who intimately knew more about me than I consciously remembered about myself. I felt a deep state of depression concerning the reality that they refused to help me when I begged, even pleaded with them, to help me get up so I could engage with them and ask questions. I never experienced fear when I was on board. The truth is, while up there I had hoped that they wouldn't return me. I wanted to stay. My spirit couldn't have felt more excited. My emotions were along the lines of, finally, I'm off that horrible planet. They finally picked me up. So to say I was deeply depressed and felt abandoned the next morning is an understatement. My sadness was a deep kick in the gut sensation of total loss. It lasted for weeks. Even if that wasn't what was really going on, their rejection of me that I felt, I didn't want to come back. I wanted to stay in space with them, away from Earth. Years later, I began studying regression sessions from the Dolores Cannon material, which detail many abductions and starseed memories people have explored while in trance. Many of her clients have no interest in these subjects, ETs, metaphysics, spiritual content, and yet, here they are remembering in full detail while regressed. Many are corporate business types that don't even have metaphysical or spiritual leanings. They're far too busy surviving in the world, chasing job promotions, than to study such esoteric topics. It's difficult to say such people are making these things up when many don't even believe in the things that are leaving their lips. The common theme I noticed between her sessions and what occurred in my personal abduction experience was that the subjects, experiencers, all felt like the people who abducted them were their family. They were somehow related to them. I know what I experienced happened. It wasn't a dream. I didn't imagine this scenario in my mind. This was more real than anything you'd experience in your waking life. It was as if I was in another dimension on board the ship. Were these our own government people? Or were they some sort of genuine otherworldly Nordic species, as the ET gossip goes? Who has heard of blonde beings in dark blue uniforms? Which ones were they? Any suggestions as to what they did to me and what they were after? Saw one in WV back around 2011 to 2012 or so. While living on the mountain and driving home, there were trees lining the road, so the only sky I could see was the stretch of road in front of me. I was high on the mountainside, only a few roads away from home. I caught something moving over the trees, and at first, I thought it was one of those huge military planes, but then I noticed it was completely silent, and those planes are loud. There is an air base in a town about 30 minutes away, so we see those planes often, but the silence told me it could not possibly be one of those planes. I stopped and watched it up through my windshield. It was super low and cruising at a fairly slow speed. I was only able to watch it through the trees for maybe 6 to 10 seconds before it was obscured by them and out of sight. It was late, sort of just past twilight, so there were some stars visible, but it was not 100% dark yet. I noticed it because it blocked out the sky, and the stars I could see disappeared. It had no obvious wings like a plane and did not have normal plane lights. There were 3 lights on each point, but there were also small lights lining the edges. There was no center light or globe that I could see, just solid black. I thought about it recently because I was watching a UFO show and they mentioned the black triangle. The description was so accurate to what I saw that I decided to look it up to see if I could find any renderings that matched what I saw, which was slightly different than the one depicted on the show. I found this image, and it is almost exactly what I saw. The only difference I'd say really is the center globe. I didn't see it, but it was fairly dark out, so perhaps it just wasn't illuminated, and the lights at each point of the triangle were on, but they didn't appear to be significantly larger than the other lights, just brighter. I vaguely remember that some of the lights were a different color. I think I remember that the lights on the points were reddish, but I am not sure. Either way, this rendering is very, very close to what I saw. It was the lights along the sides that really caught my attention because they lined the shape of the triangle in the dark. I did not notice any headlights, but by the time I stopped and was really able to look up at it, the front point was already obscured by trees, so I can't be sure if they were there or not. I have many stories, some mine, some from my mom. My mom, in her early 20s, was at a family/friend's house. This is back in the 60s, I believe. I can't recall the exact town she resided in, but it was located in a remote part of South Australia. She was sitting on the porch to get some fresh air, and on the horizon, as the sun was setting, she saw this orange orb that was changing colors from white to orange to red and was zipping across the sky, doing figure eights and loops, disappearing then reappearing. She told me of one time when my brother was walking home late one night. It was dark, and he was just walking along the footpath when a huge orb of light came out of nowhere and started hovering above him in the streetlights. It was absolutely silent and just slowly hovered, following him as he walked. He got freaked out and ran the rest of the way home. I've seen about 6 or so UFOs in my life. Some of the sightings weren't really that spectacular, like a clear night sky and a small white glowing light that was traveling in one direction before it stopped midair for several seconds, then accelerated incredibly fast in the opposite direction, then vanished. The most notable incident was when I was in the kitchen getting something as a kid and my dad was outside smoking. He yelled out, "Come quick, there's a UFO." So I did. I thought it would just be something small and orb-like, but when I looked up into the sky where my dad was looking, there was this massive triangular object slowly hovering above our backyard, maybe about 1 to 2 kilometers up. It had large lights on the corner points that were shifting from white to red and then blue. There were also a lot of other smaller little lights on its underside, and it was completely silent. I don't really remember how long it was there for or how long we were watching it for. I don't even really remember anything afterwards, and the memory of it had gone fuzzy the next day, and my dad and I never talked about it. Till one day in my late 20s, so maybe 15-ish years after it happened, when I was visiting my dad, the memory just randomly popped up in my head, so I asked Dad, "Hey, remember that UFO we saw in the backyard when I was a kid?" And my dad looked like they just had an epiphany and was like, "Hey, yeah, we did, didn't we?" Then proceeded to describe it exactly as I remembered it as well. Mind you, my dad has never been big on paranormal stuff and even refused to believe my mom and me when I was younger and would hear weird stuff in the house like footsteps and voices when there was no one there. So the fact that my dad didn't immediately brush it off and even had the same memory of it of me is just something that still sticks with me to this day. Should I be seeing a therapist to talk about my alien abduction experience? I experienced what I believe to have been an alien abduction in December 2022. Since then, my mind has been a mess. I've been struggling with my mental health for years, even before my abduction, and recently began seeing a cognitive behavioral therapist due to my anxiety and depression, but I feel like my experience has pulled me further from reality. I really don't feel comfortable mentioning my experience to my current therapist because my therapy is more generalistic, and I don't want them thinking I'm a total nut, but I feel like it could be useful to talk to someone about it. My experience has left my mind jumbled and left a gaping crack in my sense of reality. I'm fine most of the time. I can go months without thinking about it, but sometimes it comes back into my head. Sometimes it's nothing more than curiosity, other times it can be quite traumatic. I have relapses, and I feel like it interrupts my ability to live a normal life. For a few months after my abduction, I started to experience a series of very strange phenomena, and my mind was on high alert. I overanalyzed everything, and when they became less frequent, I was constantly on edge. The entirety of 2023 was spent eagerly awaiting the 1-year anniversary of my abduction, only for nothing to happen. That's a lot of wasted energy. This year has been markedly better, but I still have intrusive thoughts regarding my abduction. They can totally derail my attention and mood. Most times I can't even expose myself to anything alien related without being reminded of it. Other times I can be quite dismissive, thinking, "Oh yeah, that's something that happened." The relapses are the worst because they reduce me into a mess. I've spoken to a lot of people on here since I started posting, and while you have all been very helpful, I still have so many questions that I feel could only be answered by my captors, and some of the more intricate theories that I've been presented with have gone right over my head. I'm not in any way a conspiracy theorist. Before being abducted, I had a subtle interest in aliens, stemming from a big obsession I had over them as a kid. I was totally dismissive of ufology and branded most abductees and experiencers of UFO sightings as total nutjobs, but now I'm one of those people. I consider myself a materialist. Even before my abduction, I believed that somewhere out there in the cosmos there are other life forms, intelligent or not. Mathematically, it seems preposterous for Earth to be the only planet in the universe to support life, but I could never subscribe to the idea that there are alien motherships parked in orbit this very instant. I still struggle with that idea, but I know what I experienced. It wasn't a dream. If I wasn't there physically, then it was an out-of-body experience because it felt so real. Dreams can be crazy and trigger all kinds of emotions. I get that, but I know the difference. And despite knowing what I went through, I still doubt myself. It's an insane amount of mental gymnastics, but I can't exactly fault my brain. Maybe it's all just a big defense mechanism. Every time I think about my abduction, I can feel my head sizzle and a few of my brain cells pop one by one as I try to make sense of everything that happened. This is more of a rant than a question, but I just needed somewhere to vent. To cut a long story short, I don't feel like I'm going anywhere very fast in life, and my experience is making it hard for me to move on, and I'm not sure if I should be looking at professional help as a next step. Thanks. Unknown humanoids, 10 close encounters of the third kind. With all this talk about drone sightings, it's important to keep in mind what lies at the very heart of the UFO phenomenon. It's not about sightings of drones or craft, it's about who's inside them, aliens. Meeting ETs face to face, a close encounter of the third kind is not as rare as you might think. It happens more often than most people think. In fact, there are now many thousands of documented cases on record. This episode presents 10 little-known accounts of close encounters with extraterrestrials of all different kinds: greys, human-looking ETs, robotic beings, and humanoid creatures, both short and tall. Each account provides important information and profound insights into the UFO phenomenon, why these beings are visiting our planet, where they come from, and what they are doing. 1. Plant-picking ETs. Very early one morning in July 1954, Harold Carpenter of Temple Ewell, England, was awakened by an odd buzzing sound coming from the woods not far from his residence. Over the next few days and weeks, this weird sound kept waking him up, so one morning, he finally crawled out of bed and walked into the woods to figure out what was going on. To his utter astonishment, he walked up to a flying saucer hovering just above the forest floor. And standing underneath it were 5 short figures wearing strange jumpsuits. They looked mostly human but definitely were not normal. Each one of them was using tweezer-like instruments to place bits of leaves and vegetation in small glass-like jars. One of them spotted Harold, and in unison, they marched back into the craft, which rose vertically and quickly darted away. 2. Something abnormal. While driving one evening in October 1958, near Girona, Spain, José Luis Angelo was amazed to see a fiery, glowing light seemingly crash into the forest not far from the road. Suspecting a plane accident of some kind, he pulled off the road and walked into the forest. Instead of a plane crash, however, he walked up to a saucer-shaped craft levitating just a few feet above the ground. Standing nearby were 2 short, large-headed humanoids wearing dark jumpsuits. They appeared to be collecting samples of some kind. Jose watched them for 15 minutes until they suddenly went back into their ship and departed. 3. I want to go for a ride. One afternoon in July of 1963, 13-year-old Maria Ivanovna went to buy some bread from the store and was walking back to her home in Vitebsk, Belarus. Noticing a bright illumination around her, she looked up and observed 2 brilliant metallic discs overhead. Suddenly her 4-year-old brother ran towards one of the discs, which was descending downwards, evidently to scoop him up. Maria's sister quickly grabbed him and pulled him away before the craft could reach them. All 3 children were close enough to see a short, strange-looking humanoid sitting inside a transparent dome on top of the craft. It quickly rose up, joined the other disc, and both quickly moved away. 4. The Winstead Encounters. September 15, 1967, began an unprecedented wave of UFO activity in the small town of Winstead, Connecticut. On that evening, 2 teenage girls looked out the window of one of their homes and saw a glowing UFO crisscrossing the fields behind. Moments later, they heard an unusual noise in the barn. Looking in that direction, they saw 2 diminutive humanoids with oversized heads run across their yard. Soon a third identical-looking one joined them. In the days and weeks that followed, numerous people began to report sightings, landings, and humanoids. 5. Blue Ridge Humanoid. It was the evening of March 1, 1974, as Billy Wayne Plasters left his father's farm in Vesta, Virginia, to go buy supplies at the local store. That's when he noticed that the nearby hill was glowing with an unusual yellowish illumination. Returning some minutes later, he told his sister and brother-in-law. Stepping outside to investigate, all 3 saw a strange, glowing craft rise up from the area and fly away. But weirdly, the strange glow was still there. So, Billy and his brother-in-law drove to the location. To their amazement, they saw what looked like glowing, landed craft, and standing in front of it was a tall, well-built humanoid. They tried to talk to it, asking it questions, but the figure did not respond. When it moved towards them, they panicked and fled. Later, they found a large area of burned grass and leaves on the ground where they had seen the glowing object. 6. The shiny silver Sewickley humanoid. In January of 1974, a flap of UFO activity swept across central Pennsylvania. People across the state reported that UFOs paced them down the highway or hovered at low altitude above them. One of the most fascinating incidents occurred on March 24 when a young man was motorcycling in the hills outside of Sewickley. Coasting quietly down a small hill, he drove right up to a tall, silver-clad humanoid figure, apparently catching it by surprise. The figure quickly crouched down to the ground and then ran straight up a steep hillside, leaving behind strange footprints. 7. The sweet-smelling alien. It was late in the evening of June 25, 1974, when Mr. DP of Viterbo, Italy, heard footsteps in the courtyard outside his home. He grabbed a flashlight and went outside to investigate and found Mr. DP's cat staring into the distance, its fur bristled with fear. He also smelled an undefinable strange sweet odor. Sensing a presence behind him, he spun around and was astounded to see a glowing humanoid dressed in a shiny, skin-tight jumpsuit. The strange being promptly levitated 20 feet into the air over an acacia hedge and disappeared into the darkness. The encounter left Mr. DP bewildered and confused. In the week following his encounter, he suffered from a severe migraine headache. 8. The ET with the flashing eyes. When Carmen B. stepped outside of her home in Saint-Dizier, France, to hang her laundry one evening in July 1975, she had no idea she was about to have the most unusual experience of her life. She no sooner stepped out into the backyard than everything around her was flooded with light. Sensing a presence behind her, she turned around and was confronted by a short, large-headed humanoid wearing a jumpsuit and staring at her. She was most impressed by its large, flashing eyes that left her hypnotized and paralyzed with fear. She nearly lost consciousness from shock but was barely able to break free from her trance and race into the house. Her husband ran outside moments later, but by then the short humanoid was gone. 9. The ETs in the forest. When a group of young children went to go play in the Tukola forest near their homes in Linowek, Poland, on the afternoon of February 14, 1984, they were confronted by a sight so strange, they quickly ran in a panic towards their homes. Looking up, they saw a small unidentified craft descend downward. A ladder extended, and at least two metallic-looking humanoid figures emerged and began to approach the witnesses. Although they were very young, the children knew that what they were seeing was not normal. Investigators later had the children draw what they saw. 10. An interrupted journey. It was 4:30 p.m. on August 25, 1999, as Carlos Colon drove his new truck along National Route 5 near Trenc-Lauquin, Argentina. Then his radio filled with static and his engine failed. Rolling to a stop, he was confronted by 5 tall figures wearing jumpsuits and helmets and standing in a strange glowing dome. In what seemed like moments, the beings turned away and disappeared in an instant. But now Carlos found himself standing in a field some distance away from his truck. After the encounter, he began to experience an onslaught of bizarre psychic and paranormal events that changed his life forever. There are thousands upon thousands of cases of humanoids. These 10 are just the tip of the iceberg. And yet they provide further evidence that we are not alone in the universe. It's time for the world to face this fact. UFOs are real. Extraterrestrials are real. And a lot of people are having direct contact with them. Finally, my time to shine. I saw a UFO at Guyot Shelter in the Whites this August during my lash of knee. Woke up to pee and look at the stars around 2 a.m. Noticed that one star was moving much faster and omnidirectionally than the others. Imagine a star darting across the sky as though someone was slowly trying to entice a cat with a laser pointer. I'm a pilot and aviation enthusiast, so I tend to be a little more grounded in my perspective on what takes place above our heads. X-37B maybe? Drone? Definitely not a satellite, especially seeing it change direction and seeing faint pulses when it does. Maybe RCS thrusters? That, and I got some really creepy "you're being watched" vibes at North Mount Wilcox Shelter in MA, but I was probably just being weird. My UFO experience, firsthand. This was during the summer of 1976 to 1977, circa. I lived in northern New Jersey. I was 6 to 7 years old. My grandmother had a family farmhouse in the country just outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania. My father, mother, cousin, and I were traveling in a car to go visit for the weekend. It was about sunset when we were deep in the woods getting closer to the farmhouse. We pulled over on the side of the road because we saw a classic saucer, a silver disc with square lights all around the central midpoint in a band. The lights would turn on concentrically in a pattern from left to right, very quickly. As one light came on, it would go out, and the one to the right would go on. They were pastel colors, yellow, blue, and red. Pink. The lights would just spiral around the craft. It was hovering still above the tree line about half-mile away in mid-air. Then it slowly floated straight down into the woods. We could not see it anymore. We waited a bit before deciding to get back into our car, but then we saw it come back up and hover in the same spot for a bit. Standing still, it just all of a sudden bolted up to the left and froze. Then it bolted up to the right and shot out of sight. We finally arrived at the farmhouse, and upon entering, my grandmother commented that we were later than she expected. We then told her what we experienced, and then she proceeded to pull out newspaper clippings of UFOs spotted in the area going back to the 40s. She also told us that she saw a UFO up on a neighbor's hill across the valley in a pasture one night years ago. Upon recounting the happening to my father about 5 years ago, he told me something I did not remember. He said the reason we pulled over is that our car was illuminated with light from something above us. He thought at first it was a helicopter. A few years earlier I was sharing a bedroom with my parents. I was about 5/6. My bed was against the wall on the same side as our doorway to the bedroom. My parents' bed was on the opposite side of the room, directly facing the door. One night, or maybe more, I woke up in the middle of the dark night. I was lying on my back, facing towards the doorway. I see this procession of pastel-colored, luminous, see-through, diamond-shaped lights floating into the room through the doorway. They were about 5 to 6 inches apart from each other, like on a Christmas tree light string but no string. They floated through the door over my parents' bed and then floated right over towards me and floated into my forehead. It was very peaceful, and I was not scared. I was just mesmerized. I have since told this story to many friends wondering what it was. I even brought it up to psychic mediums, and no one has any inkling of what it was. A few years back I mentioned this to my mom, and she was surprised that I saw them too. I was like, what? I can't believe we never talked about this. I asked her if she had any inkling of what they were, and she said she had no clue. I started to think over the past 10 years that the lights in the room were related to the UFO we saw, as they were the same color lights, but I am not sure. I have also experienced what I would call a light being in my room about 7 years ago. I was asleep in my bed and woke up about 2:30 a.m. and opened my eyes, and there were big, 7 to 8 feet tall, luminous, concentric rings of pastel colors from the center outward. It was oval-shaped and had the appearance of a body but not in full body form. I was deeply praying over a situation that was occurring at the time, so I took this as a positive sign, though when I woke up, I screamed and woke up my partner, as it was so unexpected. I reached for my glasses, only to find them gone. I have also since learned that over 60% of UFO abductees have negative blood types. My father and I are both A. I have also over the years woken up with scratches that I swore were not there the night before and made jokes that I think I got abducted again. Half wondering, half joking, not even knowing if I ever was in the first place. I have also found out that there was a high concentration of UFO sightings in PA in the mid-1970s, which aligns with my case. Does anyone have any insight into what the lights in my room were or any connections to UFOs or can shed any light on what they think from my story? Thanks. XAG tells his story, what really happened to he and his friend. Kerry Lovelace, ex-Assistant Attorney General for the state of Vermont, until his retirement. He was keen to tell his story and had never disclosed this information for fear of losing his job and or standing in the legal community. It concerns an incident near Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri. Here's his testimony. Toby and I were both city kids. Neither one of us had ever been camping in our lives. There were plenty of national forest campgrounds all around us, but Toby convinced me the long drive to Devil's Den was worth it because it offered 1. A high plateau where he could stargaze without light pollution and 2. I could photograph wildlife and scenery. He was against staying at the park's campground, comparing it to camping in a parking lot in the woods. So, we trespassed deep into the nature preserve that was off limits and set up our camp on the edge of a plateau abutting a tree line. When we were 4 hours into our drive south toward the Arkansas border, I realized I left my damn camera on my kitchen counter. It was a big disappointment, but I was determined to make the best of it. We did bring our small tent, insect repellent, and sunscreen, and enough food and water for 2 overnights. On our first night we were exhausted from a hike we took when we first arrived, a long drive, and setting up a campsite. Around 9 p.m., Toby noticed 3 stars on the horizon. They made a perfect triangle. They were small at first and moved in perfect unison. It became obvious this was one solid object and not 3 independent lights orchestrated to move in perfect formation. We watched it ascend and grow closer and much larger until it was directly over the top of our campsite. We noticed that as it passed through a star field, it blotted them until it had moved past. Then they would blink it back on. So, It was one solid object. It was odd that at first this thing in the sky made us anxious, but that soon dissipated. We noticed the whole forest was now dead silent when an hour earlier it had been alive with crickets and tree frogs. While this thing was over our heads, we became abruptly disinterested. We were also suddenly drowsy. We weren't exhausted, but we were on the verge of sleep. At midnight we just decided to get in the tent and go to sleep. The apathy puzzles me to this day. I woke up at 3 a.m. to brilliant multicolor lights, white, yellow, and orange illuminated the inside of our tent. Through a rear small net window, I saw the forest behind us was lit up like a night game at the ballpark. I noticed my clothing and boots were all askew. I pushed Toby aside so we could both look outside toward the meadow. There was an enormous UFO as large as a 5-story office building. It was a triangle with each leg being about a city block in length. It was 50 feet tall and sat stationary, 30 feet over the meadow floor. There was a noise too. It was a low bass hum or drone. The sound was not particularly loud, but it was incredibly powerful. It was like standing next to a running diesel train engine or a large industrial machine. We saw what I first took to be children walking around the meadow underneath the triangle. There was a column of white light, about 30 feet in diameter, shining down from the center of the triangle. We watched as these little people walked into the light and just dissolved, one by one, until they were gone. The hum stopped, and the corner lights all returned to brilliant white. The white cylinder from the middle stopped, and the thing rose about like a hot air balloon. It made a 1/3, clockwise, rotation and continued its ascent, picking up speed until it was high in the sky and then gone. Earlier, we were apathetic, but now we're terrified beyond belief. We abandoned our campsite and ran to the car and drove back to base. Toby left his backpack with his name and base address written inside. This is how they were able to find us so quickly. Both of us suffered severe sunburn all over our bodies. Even the soles of my feet were burned. We were terribly dehydrated, and we spent a couple of days in the hospital. The same hospital where we worked. While hospitalized, we were interrogated separately by 2 men in business suits. They identified themselves as special agents from the OC. The OC is the Office of Special Investigations. It's the investigative arm of the USAF Security Police. I recall the older man was a major and the younger a captain. Intermittently over the next 10 years I was plagued with dreadful nightmares about that night. At my wife's suggestion, I began to keep a journal of my nightmares. I kept a pen and paper by my bedside and did my best to document each nightmare before it evaporated. I think that helped me. Ever since 1977, I have been uncomfortable being outside in open spaces, especially after dark. I sleep with a light or the television on. I keep them loaded. I keep a loaded 380 by my bedside table, along with a high-intensity flashlight. I am uncomfortable around elderly Asian women for some odd reason. I feel anxious at the mall when we walk past a window display with naked mannequins in it. Something terrible happened to us at Devil's Den. What I experienced that led me to believe something is not explained. One late evening I was walking in a forest area close to where I live. It's in a pretty densely populated area, but there are maybe a few square miles of forest. I was in a field just outside of the woods when I heard something big approaching overhead in the direction I was walking. It was loud enough that my initial reaction was to look for shelter. But then it was above me, and I could feel it passing me. I looked up and could see nothing but stars but knew from the sound that it was passing straight above me at a low altitude. It sounded large. Much larger than a drone, and I could hear other sounds from it than its propulsion. It felt like a carrier ship was sailing above me in the air. It was cruising fairly slowly, much slower than a plane, and after it passed, I could hear a beeping sound like when a semi-truck backs up. The sound became lower and lower as the thing removed itself from my position. I never saw anything, I only heard and felt the vibrations of it moving above me and removing itself from my position. I have never been able to come up with an adequate explanation for what I sensed, and I feel that it does not really conform to other people's UFO sightings since I never actually saw anything. Only the sounds and vibrations told me anything was there. I shared this story with less than a handful of people in my life. I am a very scientifically minded person, and before this experience, the great filter theory and the vast distances in space always told me there could not be others here on Earth with us. This did not feel like something we made, though. Sharing it here since I am completely anonymous, and this should be a sympathetic forum for my experience. My wife and I were coming home from visiting a friend and his spouse, where they had just recounted the wildest experience he'd ever shared with me. While driving into Goldsboro, North Carolina, and roughly beside Seymour Johnson AFB, he said something in the sky caught his attention, and when he looked up, he realized it wasn't the sky at all, but was instead the underside of a massive, black triangle craft that he told me was Independence Day sized, at least miles across. As he was driving, he pulled up next to the vehicle in the next lane and honked at them until they looked over, whereupon he pointed up. Craziest thing, but he said they looked up, looked back to him with their eyes about to bug out, and then locked their focus back on the road again. Would not look back over at him or look back up, just too much to process, we guessed. He repeated this twice more before passing from under the craft, which he said was certainly fully covering the AFB. I fully believed him at the time, for a number of reasons I won't bore you with here. Safe to say he and I have been best friends since kindergarten, and are nearing 40 as I am typing this. Good visit, though. We cooed and cawed over his baby some, and finally my wife and I left to go home, about 15 minutes away. We made the journey without incident and talked about what our friends had told us the whole way and turned down our driveway, which is 3/4 mile. We live in a very rural area some ways off the main road. We made it very nearly into our yard when we both noticed something pretty big, just over the treetops right around or over our house. As you might expect, it was a black triangle UFO. This one wasn't nearly stadium-sized, more along the lines of an F-15 or F-18 fighter jet, but bulked out due to the straight lines of the triangular shape. It was indeed very quiet running, but not entirely silent, with the sound reminding me quite a bit of a gas-powered golf cart. My first reaction was to flash my brights at it, lol, and it returned the favor. Honestly can't say from where precisely, but my instinct is to say that they were produced from the circular lights in either angle facing us. That your account included the bit about the bright lights is what got me to type all this out again after so long, I will note. We continued rolling the rest of the way into our yard, my foot barely on the gas, and this black triangle continued towards us, maintaining altitude. I noted at the time that it seemed to be spinning very slowly as it moved and that it had 3 circular white lights at each angle of the triangle and one much larger yellow-white light at the very center. The strangest thing to me was on one of the flat faces/sides of the craft, there appeared to be 3 bubble/blister viewing ports, something rather like you'd see on one of those old World War II bombers. It was so close that I could see the glow and reflection of the green console lights on the interior of the bubbles, very much like screens were concealed just out of sight. My wife almost had her phone out to take a picture, and the most intense feeling of dread and smallness overtook me, the first time in my life I believe I have ever had a prey response provoked in me so powerfully and without particular stimulus. Other than there being a big floating black triangle craft directly over my car. I stopped her from taking the picture, long story short, telling her that we didn't want that kind of trouble. For a number of reasons, that is very uncharacteristic for me, a wild variation from the norm. I continue to hold myself accountable for this. With it that close overhead, I was able to make out the surface of the craft, at least the bottom, which looked like a lattice of pipework and metal plating, not at all unlike a Borg cube. It was also at this point I noted the particular sound it was making, the golf cart-like engine sound. It just continued on from there at a leisurely pace, roughly eastward. So many questions over the years resulting from this, but the one my wife and I voiced immediately was that they had been listening to us at my friend's house and were sending some form of message. What that message was, or why it needed to be sent, are deeper holes than we ought to go into here. I am still not entirely of one mind on what the craft was either, whether it was USAF or extra/ultraterrestrial. My gut tells me ET doesn't have dash lights or windows, but I can't say that for sure either. I know for a fact that Eastern NC is home to a drone testing program, with new facilities and partnerships continuing to expand this year even. Part of that includes testing advanced technologies that have been developed by or come from who knows where really. I don't think what we, or you or any of the rest, saw was a drone, to be clear. But I think the two subjects might be more than tangentially related. A further note that this was the second UFO experience we'd had that year, having observed 3 orange orbs dancing in the late evening sky to our south/southwest, which would be roughly Kenansville and or Warsaw, North Carolina, every night for maybe 2 weeks. Longer story involved there, and I don't know what, if any, bearing it has on the Black Triangle, but there it is too, or at least a rambling reference for it. My UFO sighting. In 2019, I was driving home from a friend's in Roscoe, Illinois. I was driving through cornfields at the edge of town heading back in at like midnight, and I saw this thing hovering over a cornfield with a light. It was weird because as I was driving closer, it didn't feel like I could see it any clearer. But when I pulled over to look at it, it was still a decent distance away from the road, but I could see that it was in the shape of a bean and silver. It had a light coming from the front, but I couldn't really see from where. On the side was a dim blue light that illuminated it enough for me to see that it was silver. Unfortunately, I can't remember if I saw metal paneling on it or if it was straight solid. I'm pretty sure it did have paneling, though. After probably around 10 seconds, It turned on and just floated away. There was no sound or movement. As it was going away, it looked like it was moving really slow as well, but in a couple seconds it was completely out of sight. Directly after I start driving again, I see a super low flying jet with lights in the shape of a U flying over me in the direction of the bean. I could really only see the lights there, no noise or anything like that. It was probably around 200 feet in the air. I always said 2 really big trees because that was the only thing around me to gauge distance. After that, 2 more jets show up, flying around the same height, speed, and direction, but these, after looking it up, were shaped most like F-35s. As I was getting closer to the neighborhoods, I saw a V-shaped jet doing the same thing as the others. I could really only see the lights on this one too, so I am inferring the shape of it. At this point, I'm basically back in town, and where I used to live is like 3 big neighborhoods right next to each other. As I see my neighborhood, that's when, for the next 20 minutes, there would be those low-flying jets, flying directly above entire neighborhoods of houses heading in the direction the bean went off in while not making that much noise at all from what I remember. There were no more of the U or V jets that I saw, and they were all the F-35 looking ones. I was driving around my neighborhood like a crazy person, calling my dad and this and that. There were only 2 other cars I saw driving around looking at it with me. That's when I was driving down the road on the edge of the neighborhood, and there was just a drone hovering over a house with a small red light at the bottom. But the drone isn't like the drones you see nowadays. It literally looked like an F-35 or something like that size down, probably around 5 feet wide. It was a dark sand kind of color. Thinking about that now, I have no idea how it was able to hover or why it didn't look like the drones we have now, but whatever, I guess. All of these jets were flying super slow too, and that always bothered me, but after some research, it's possible they were flying just above their stall speed. That's the only explanation I can find without talking out my ass. From what I saw, there were around 15 to 20 jets that I saw. I posted a video that I took of them flying over the neighborhood on Snap, and the only response I got was something like, "Yeah, I saw that too, that's crazy." That's the only thing I heard about it after. No news, no local talk, nothing. The videos I took sucked, though, to be honest. When I tried to video the bean, it barely showed up on my phone, and you could see the headlight when I could see the shape. Same thing with the U-jet. But I did have pictures of the little tiny drone clearly. I've been through 3 phones and as many accounts since then, so I don't think I'll ever get those videos back. I wish I could provide a more detailed and cohesive account of this, but I don't want to make assumptions and have my memory become distorted. But please ask me any questions and let me know what you think of this. Been driving me crazy for years. This is a story that will undoubtedly frustrate you, just as it has for me, for reasons you'll soon understand. I've sat on this story for a while now, and the only reason I'm sharing it now is because I noticed some familiar themes in my buddy's account that overlap heavily with that of UFO witnesses, even though my friend did not actually see a UFO. I want to provide this story for everyone's consideration, rather than keep it to myself. He confided in me because he knows I've been studying this phenomenon for about a decade now. He told me that, late one night, after midnight, he awoke suddenly with an urge to urinate. For context, my buddy's house isn't in the middle of nowhere, but imagine living on a dead-end road where the end of the cul-de-sac terminates and is immediately adjacent to a lush, wooded, undeveloped area. So, aside from his neighbors and the main road a lil ways away, he's tucked away nicely in there, and it's great for sky watching. Another thing I want to note, my buddy isn't super into UFOs, but he loves watching the sky with me and talking to me about them. His girlfriend, on the other hand, is way more into that type of stuff, but not in terms of a scholarly or academic approach or whatever. She just casually reads about this stuff more than him. The thing is, the reason she reads about it more often than him is because apparently, she has had UFO sightings her entire life, strange lights in the sky pulling unusual maneuvers. My friend used to joke about it, but he has called me frantically at least twice over the years to help him triangulate an object he is currently seeing with his girlfriend. His descriptions of the objects, though not anomalous, were always enough for me to raise an eyebrow. I'd also like to mention that my friend also experienced an incredibly vivid, intense paranormal experience. Again, this kid isn't into this stuff too much at all. I've given him and his girlfriend the rundown on what you should do in terms of video recording. 1. Record in landscape, try to get a reference point in the shot such as a tree line or something to help gauge size and distance, etc., and he's acted on that advice, but unfortunately the sightings were not conducive to a quality video. Anyway, onto the story. My buddy wakes up suddenly one night to go urinate, and as he's standing there in the bathroom, which is directly next to a window facing the woods outside in his backyard, he realizes that the entire backyard is illuminated, like bright as shit, He described it as peak luminosity of a particularly low and sizable fireball, the ones that turn night into day for a split second, or like those construction floodlights they elevate and put on the roadway for construction or accidents. This got my attention. Where have I heard that one before? He doesn't remember if his backyard became light as he was standing there urinating, or if it was already bright when he walked in, and he just didn't notice at first. My friend is now thoroughly curious, and he exits his bathroom and goes into the living room to get another vantage point to see if the light is out front, too. After he looked out the front, he said the light was everywhere, as if it were coming from above. When I asked him about the characteristics and nature of the light, he described it as totally uniform. I asked him this in an attempt to determine the elevation and angle of where a light source may be coming from. If he could only see the light through one side of his house, but not the other, that may bring me closer to the answer. He checked the neighbor's house through his window to see if their lights were turned on or whatever, but nothing was. He could find no origin for this brilliant light. Now, he goes back to a window and begins looking up to try and find where it's coming from, but he said that it was like coming from nowhere and was just all around. Naturally, I asked him about the moon. I believe it was clear that night, and although I can't recall what phase of the moon it was at the time, he was absolutely certain that this light, whatever it was far brighter than the brightest moonlight he has seen. In other words, in his 35 years of life, he has never once seen conditions that would illuminate an area so brightly and so uniformly in the middle of the night, let alone by the moon. Then, he said something that really creeped me out, because I am familiar with the potential implications behind it. He said that as he was pressed up against his windows looking upward and around for this light, he noticed everything fell completely silent. He said that all of a sudden, every bug that ever made noise outside his house at night just wasn't there anymore. This is the middle of summer in upstate New York, it's loud up there at night. But that night, for him, it wasn't. It was at first, but then suddenly it wasn't. The strangest part of all comes when I ask him the obvious, so when you went outside to try and find out what it was, what did you see? He told me he never went outside to look. I was flabbergasted, almost angry. I asked him why. And he kind of paused for a moment, and he said he honestly didn't know why. Then, almost as if realizing how strange that is, only then, when retelling the story to me, did he say it back to himself out loud with a hint of confusion in his voice. Wait, why didn't I go outside to check? I asked him what he did instead, and he said he suddenly became disinterested in whatever the light was, got tired, and went to bed. That is like the complete opposite of everything I know about my very close friend. Despite me being the one with a real hardcore fascination on the subject, I know he would be just as hyped to get an opportunity to take a video of a UFO as I would be. In fact, that's what he had already done multiple times over the years, as I laid out above, but for whatever reason, not that night, and he can't even explain himself why that is. I wanted to make a joke about how he should maybe look into hypnotic regression, but I figured that might be for another time. Anyway, that's the story. Curious to hear your thoughts. I know he did not see a UFO technically, but this story had a lot of hallmarks of UFO experiences here, and while I totally concede that there's likely some man-made or natural explanation for it, I felt that not sharing this with you all would deprive everybody of the opportunity to decide for themselves what his experience was representative of. Thanks for listening. My mother believes I was abducted as a child, and then I had a strong synchronicity while discussing it. My mother has told me on occasion growing up that when I was 5 or so, I was abducted by aliens near Lake Tahoe, Nevada. I always chalked it up to Mom trying to be fun and adventurous by telling tall tales. My mom was an awesome mother the majority of the time. She really struggled as a single mom but always had time to answer my unending questions about the world growing up and really nurtured a curiosity in me that serves me to this day. Fast forward to about a month ago. With all this UFO disclosure stuff happening, I was going through some ontological shock, questioning reality and revisiting my assumptions and beliefs. I decided to ask my mother about the details of this supposed abduction. The paraphrase story. My mom, sister, and I went up to Lake Tahoe. We lived in Reno for reference, for a hike day on the beach with some of her friends and their kids. It was about a 20-minute walk through trees down a steep trail to the beach in the mid-afternoon. About a half hour into our stay, I went missing from the group of boys I was with. She couldn't remember much detail about what we were doing or how I really could have just disappeared as she was paying closer attention to the girls' group. Us boys did have an adult male that was supposed to be watching us, but he said he didn't know where I went. A search started. Everyone spread out, calling my name and looking. 45 minutes pass, and my mother decides to call the police. Pre-cell phone era, she had to go to the nearest house in the area. She says they wouldn't let her in to call, but did for her. The police and family continued the search for another 15 to 20 minutes until a fisherman found me under a bush, 15 feet from the trail we came in on, She says this point is extra weird because we were on a private beach and she doesn't recall seeing any people fishing at the time. To my annoyance, the only question asked of me after being found was, "Did you hear us calling your name?" To which the answer was, of course, no. Again, the abduction could just be fun speculation, as I treated it as such, but this is where the synchronicity comes in. A few days ago I was with my dad going out to dinner. They separated before this event. I'm here with him in South Florida now, and we're discussing this event to get his side of the story. As I am mid-sentence, I notice the car in front of us has a Florida license plate with a Lake Tahoe frame. I point it out to my dad, and he sees the same thing. A little extra anecdote. The car was clearly pulling into the same restaurant. The restaurant is separated from every other building in the area by large parking sections. I texted my mom as I was entering the place, which led to a call from her. I stepped back outside to talk, taking the opportunity to go find the car I had assumed just parked. But it was nowhere to be found. Dad had parked the car while I went in to find a seat. He said it went on to somewhere else. Weird, but not damning. Now let's add another layer. Either between talking to my mom and the synchronicity, or after the synchronicity, I was watching a podcast with a guest who was a high-ranking military person claiming to have had an intense encounter with aliens that left him with disabilities. I stopped after what he showed. One of the visible effects he showed the podcaster was a dimple on part of his skin that he claimed wasn't there pre-encounter. His look is identical to the 3 I have. So that's my story, folks. I'm 36 years old now, and recent revelations, to me at least, have me shook a bit. Hopefully I can maybe find some answers here. Or at least some communities. Thanks for listening. 10 Incredible Extraterrestrial Encounters. While some are skeptical of UFOs and extraterrestrials, many believe and know. They have moved beyond belief to actual experiential knowledge. A first-hand encounter with extraterrestrials changes the way a person views the universe. They know beyond doubt that we are not alone in this universe. And a lot of people have had this kind of experience. This video presents 10 first-hand accounts of people who have met humanoids face to face. These cases come from all over the world. They show that we are not the only people in this universe. We are one of many. 1. The Aliens and the Shepherd Boy. In the summer of 1938, Mariano Melgar, a 7-year-old shepherd boy from Munico, Spain, was minding his family's herd of cows when an ET craft landed nearby. A door opened and 3 men stepped out. Mariano approached to get a closer look, and one of them shot him with a beam of light. Mariano thought they might be from another country. Later he would change his mind. 2. UFO and humanoid at Lake Langelmävesi. When Ilona Johansson Paasonen went to enjoy a vacation in August 1945 at Lake Langelmävesi, Finland, she was awakened one morning by light blazing into her room. Looking outside, she saw a fiery object zoom towards her. She dove to the ground in fear. Peering outside again, she saw 2 figures in a boat that clearly was not normal. Weirdly, she passed out. 3. The Aliens at the Water Fountain. On the night of December 24, 1950, 10-year-old Antonietta Chiara was sent outside her home in Casoan, Italy, to fetch a pail of water. Going to the nearby fountain, she saw 3 thin humanoid figures with oversized heads and big dark eyes, and all 3 were staring right at her. Realizing they were not human, she panicked and fled. 4. The Men in the Transparent Sphere. On the night of October 18, 1968, 3 people were enjoying dinner in their home in Medulla, Florida, when suddenly the TV quit and the dog freaked out. Looking outside, they saw a transparent sphere floating near their house. And inside it were 2 short men working a strange device. Little did they know, people all over the area were seeing UFOs. 5. A UFO repair case. One night in February 1970, Leona Nielsen and her friend were staying in a cabin near Coram, Montana, when a light outside caught their attention, and they saw a classic flying saucer land along the river shore. It seemed to be in trouble and was shooting out colored sparks over a wide area while 2 human-looking figures rushed around it. Leona sensed that the craft had sustained damage. 6. The ETS on the sidewalk. It was 11 p.m. on June 18, 1980, as Antonio D'Amico walked along a sidewalk in the small village of Barrancas, Argentina. Suddenly he noticed 2 short humanoids wearing skin-tight, luminous jumpsuits standing a short distance away. Both were staring at him. Fearful, Antonio decided to leave. But to his shock, the strange figures followed. 7. Alien robot on the school playground. One afternoon in mid-April 1990, 5 children were on the playground of the Yerevan Primary School in Yerevan, Armenia, when a spherical object landed behind the school. 3 robotic beings came out. One approached the students and spoke to them about the future of their country, but not before striking one with a beam of light and levitating another boy. 8. Aliens at summer camp. It was 1991, the last night at summer camp for a group of girls in Pelhřimov, Czech Republic. As they sat around the bonfire, a brilliant beam of light shone down on them. It was a UFO. The camp leaders ordered all the girls to their tents. But shortly later, a few of them sneaked out and came face to face with 3 tall humanoids in divers suits. The UFO remained overhead. 9. The ETS by the chapel. On the night of December 27, 2006, a college student was walking by the chapel at the University of Nairobi in Kenya, Africa, when a glowing egg-shaped craft dropped from the sky and landed in front of her. Moments later, an ET emerged. The student was unable to move as 2 more figures appeared, then one of them approached her. Thankfully, 2 other students came on the scene. 10. The hunters become the hunted. It was 3 a.m. on December 12, 2011, as 3 hunters and one of their sons were hiking back to their car after hunting in the Kaimai Ranges of New Zealand. When a glowing object appeared overhead, they became puzzled. When it moved closer and revealed itself to be a craft, they became concerned. Shortly later, they came face to face with a strange humanoid that would leave them all shaken. These 10 cases provide just a brief glimpse into the nature of contact with UFOs and extraterrestrials. But the point is, contact is far more common than most people realize. The truth is that there are thousands upon thousands of cases, each of them unique, each providing another piece of the puzzle that is the UFO mystery. The only thing we know for sure is that UFOs are real, and we are not alone in this universe. And if you've listened this far, you are probably one of the people who not only believe, you know. Some sort of sighting, described by my mother. Hello all. Long-time listener. I have an interest in the UFO phenomenon, clearly. And I'm particularly interested in trying to wrap my brain around the different hypotheses that are alternatives to the ETH. I certainly don't rule out the ETH. I just think it's fascinating to try it and think about other possibilities. But that's not what this post is about. Hope this is the right place to share, and please forgive me if it's not. But I wanted to share something that my mother casually shared with me last year. About something she and a couple of other friends witnessed. I'm in my early 40s. My mom is in her late 50s, teen parents. My mom could neither be described as someone who is mentally ill, meaning she has no history of psychosis or anything like that. Nor is she a liar or someone who is prone to telling fanciful stories. She can't remember the exact year. But she feels like it was somewhere from 10 to 15 years ago. And this is what she described. She and some girlfriends were driving in a vehicle one night. My mom was a passenger, and they were dropping my mother off back home from whatever it was they were doing. We live in central Indiana, and she described the fields as being down at the time. Which makes me believe this probably took place in late fall/early winter. In any event, they're driving northbound on a country road, approaching my parents' neighborhood. There's essentially open fields for miles on either side of the car. Save for the occasional lone house. Directly south of my parents' neighborhood is a small patch of woods, probably 5 to 10 acres max, that sits in the northwest corner of a field. The woods and field are separated from the neighborhood by an east-west country road. As they are getting closer to the woods, seemingly out of nowhere, an object zips across the field that's to the east of the road. Close to the line of trees that make up the southern portion of the woods. Zips across the road and keeps going, zipping into the field, and away, that's to the west of the road. That's a lot of zips. But basically what I'm trying to convey is that it moved very fast. According to her. What she describes they saw was a glowing/swirling orb of blue and white light. Kind of turning over on itself as it moved on its lateral path. She said it was somewhere in the range of basket size to maybe beach ball size. And that it flew across at about headlight height. The driver had to slam on the brakes. And they all were basically like, WTF? They briefly talked about it. And one of the other passengers interpreted it as something like a spirit or apparition. Associating it with being as if it were related to the recent death of a pet or family member. I don't remember exactly. My mom gets dropped off. She tells my father, who really didn't show any interest in what she described. And then she just went on with life. Never talking about it again, until telling me. And I'm not even sure what we were discussing that made her bring up. I told her I was very interested in hearing the accounts of the other women in the car. But unfortunately, she's not socialized with the other people in the car for quite some time. UFO sightings back in the 60s. So, kind of an interesting story from my dad that happened in the 60s in Tuscaloosa County, Alabama. My uncle had been seeing UFO sightings for quite a few months from the summer of '69 to the summer of '70. Now for him this wouldn't exactly be unheard of because he was fond of shrooms back then, But anyway, he had reported seeing a disc-shaped flying object surrounded by lights that would fly over the lakes, usually appearing not long after all the dogs in the neighborhood began barking like crazy. Now if it was just my uncle, I would chalk this up to him tripping on shrooms, but one night was different. That night he went out with my father, my grandmother, and a friend of theirs and her mother. That night my dad told me they all saw the same disc-shaped object surrounded by lights as it slowly floated over the water of the lake. It never seemed to disturb the water, even though it was only a few feet above it. It was silent as it moved before hovering higher into the air and flying away. Before it flew away, however, my uncle attempted to get its attention by jumping on the car and waving a flashlight in the air, yelling, "Land here! Land here!" much to the horror of the ladies present. My dad never saw them again, but my uncle noticed it a few more times before the sighting stopped later that year. Has anyone else from around the Tuscaloosa-Jefferson County area ever seen UFOs or heard of these sightings from anyone else? My 3 sightings. The Phoenix Lights and 2 up-close, face-to-face alien encounters in the desert while camping. On my way home from work as a hospice RN in Mesa, Arizona, to my home in Phoenix, Arizona, I was driving on I-60, which was under construction. I had to exit every overpass, which was made entirely of dirt. I was high on a dirt hill when I saw the massive boomerang-shaped craft coming towards me. I jumped out of my truck as it approached me. There was a nearby streetlight that was parallel to me due to the construction dirt hill I was on top of. The tip of the left wing went almost over my head by about 30 feet. I could clearly see the bottom skin of the craft due to the streetlight nearby and the light from the bottom of the craft. The whole bottom was one piece, no rivets, no seams, gray color, and reflective about 20% but mostly a matte finish. The bottom was covered with thousands of thumbprint-like indentations all over the bottom. The nearest light was an opening in the bottom of the craft that had an inner lining tube that was silver in color. The light looked like lava flowing down, stopping, and flowing back up into the bottom of the craft. It looked like a thick liquid that was orange crush orange, and as it thinned out, it looked yellow. I was close enough to think I'd get burned, but there was no heat, no sound, and no odor. As it flew off, there was a colorful mist that followed it, waving like a flag. I was overwhelmed with a feeling of gratitude. I stood there and cried as it floated out of sight. It was an amazingly positive event in my life. Ever since I've been a much more considerate, calmer, more forgiving person. All the 25 years, that feeling has never left me. I'm on UFO Witness Season 1 Episode 5. The reenactment has the bottom of the craft wrong. The first in-person, face-to-face encounter was about 2005. I was meeting some friends in the desert for a hike. I got there early, about 4 a.m., and figured I'd nap a bit. As I pulled into the parking lot for the trail and backed into my space, my headlights were right on 3 beings about 20 feet from my truck. The tall one was about 5.5 feet, and 2 smaller ones in front of it were about 3.5 feet. Head-to-toe silver suits with a mesh-like fabric over the face, like ramen noodle woven shapes where you'd expect eyes to be. They were plump, like a gingerbread man cookie, not as fat, but that shape. Gunmetal gray color, slightly silverish and somewhat reflective of my bright headlights shining on them. I froze, staring at them and them staring at me. After about 30 seconds or a bit more, the 2 smaller ones at the same time turned to their right and walked away. As they did, they appeared to be half an inch wide when standing sideways towards me. The taller one simply gazed at me as I turned to face them. I put my truck in forward and took off. My guess is that their suits have a camouflage type system in place. Had they been standing sideways as I backed into the parking spot, they would have blended in with the shrubs behind them, and I'd not have noticed them. I did not see a craft and did not stay around to look for one. They didn't look threatening to me but also didn't look welcoming. The second one was 2015. I was camping in the desert in the southwest USA. It was about 2 a.m., and I was still in the truck cab eating pistachios and tossing the shells out of the open window. A huge full moon behind me at about 2 o'clock in the sky was so bright I could read by the light of it. I was watching it in the rearview mirror. All at once a tall being walked about 6 feet behind my truck and stopped. I turned around and looked out of the open back window. It was about 8 feet tall, very, very skinny, with long arms with elbows below its waist area, a foot-long skinny neck, and an oval head that had what looked like a 4-foot beard or tube hanging from its lower face. I couldn't make out the feet or hands. It was walking like it was struggling, like if you walk in a swimming pool with the resistance of the water. As it stopped, it barely moved its shoulders, but that freakish long neck turned the big head at me. I don't know if they saw me in the truck. I froze. It soon turned its head forward and continued on walking. It was bizarrely thin, like an insect. I got scared thinking it's so thin, it's hungry, I took off, camping equipment in the back of my truck flying to the side of the dirt road as I drove. I went back 4 months later in the daylight after building up nerve to go back. I found the pile of pistachio shells, so I knew the exact spot where I was. I saw nothing unusual. I drove around a bit, it was a nice day, and I found a place that looked like a good hiking spot. As I got out of the truck, maybe about 3 in the afternoon, I heard diesel engines struggling, digging, like backhoes, earth movers, and dump trucks dumping a load and banging the scooper to unload all the dirt, trucks backing up with the beep, beep, sound, but there was nothing around. I was in the middle of nowhere on a dirt road, no other cars around for miles. I couldn't figure out where the digging noise was coming from, but I actually drove around looking for a construction site, but I was alone for miles in the desert. I wondered and went back to the spot where I heard the digging. I got on my hands and knees and listened to the ground. It was coming from under the desert landscape. I was standing on where the digging was coming from. As I stood up, I saw 2 very shiny white pickup trucks facing the front of my truck, with onyx black windows. They were so shiny, and the sun reflecting on them hurt my eyes. Driving in the desert piles dust on a truck, these looked like they just came off a showroom. I got scared, they weren't there a minute ago. I guess they saw me listening to the ground, and I guess I wasn't supposed to hear that sound. As I got back in the truck, I saw 2 more white trucks exactly the same behind me, facing me. I drove off looking to see if they were following me, they weren't. The 4 trucks came out of nowhere and were pristine and shiny, it was so odd. The windows tinted black. As I got to the nearest road, my heart sank as there were 2 more of the same trucks waiting for me at the intersection, facing each way, so whichever way I was going, 1 truck would be right behind me. As I got on the road, the truck behind me followed me right on my bumper. I was going 90 miles per hour, and the truck was right behind me. The other truck then was trying to pass me. I was swerving 2 lanes to keep it from passing me. I came up to an exit to some buildings and decided to give it a shot and exited. At the same time, the 2 trucks slowed down and made a U-turn and went back. They could have taken me out in the desert, and no one would have found me or my truck, but they didn't. Did they want to kill me on the road? I don't know, but I was terrified to go home thinking they'd be there, but I never saw them again and never went back. My thought is, I discovered a government installation being built, maybe for national security, so I keep that location to myself. It might be very important to keep their location unknown. My other thought. Why chase me when that giant insect-like being was walking around a few months prior about 4 miles from where I heard the digging sound? Is that location ET/human/government? I'm still scared stiff. I haven't talked about it at all till lately. I reported my 2 sightings to MUFON. I did not tell about the site where the digging was going on as I was afraid to disclose that area and for retaliation from whoever was digging underground out there. Could there be a connection with the being I saw so close and the digging underground? I'm very curious what's going on out there, but I won't return. I was walking with 2 friends, Bob and Jennifer, in the middle of the night, in the side streets of West Croydon, Adelaide, about 27 years ago. We had just passed through an intersection when Bob stopped and called us back to look at something down the street we had just crossed. I was fat and lazy and couldn't be bothered, but Jennifer went to look, and when she saw it, she demanded that I come and look too. Bob said it was a UFO. It definitely looked weird, but not so weird that alien spaceships seemed like a plausible explanation, so I said no. It looked kind of like a set of floodlights on top of a tall building. They were all lined up in an L shape over the building, but at a skewed angle, so it seemed like they might be attached to light poles on top of the walls, to shine down on the roof, which was flat. They were very, very bright, but I persuaded myself that they weren't impossibly bright because the streetlights were dim and there was no other source of light. My eyes were adjusted to the dark. They also appeared to be a little too high to be attached to the building, but they were quite a long way away, so it was difficult to tell. We stood there arguing about it for ages. I and Jennifer agreed that they were just floodlights, but Bob insisted they were not, and he gradually won her over. They really did look too high and too bright, but I refused to accept a spooky explanation, and floodlights were the most plausible thing I could think of, so I stuck to my guns. Bob said they were moving, and it really seemed like they were, but so slowly that it was almost imperceptible. Suggestion can be powerful, and I didn't want to be fooled, so I denied it, and we continued to argue. It really felt like a long time had passed. I noticed that we were all standing in the middle of the road, at an intersection, and we were so wrapped up in the experience that we probably wouldn't have noticed if a car was coming. I mentioned this to my friends, but they didn't seem to care. I remember feeling annoyed because Jennifer was taking Bob's side and completely ignoring me, but I dismissed the thought and went back to focusing on the lights. It was like watching grass grow, and I was getting worn out of standing there, but the closer I looked, the more it seemed like there really was something wrong with the lights. I was still arguing that they were attached to the building when I realized that they weren't even over the building anymore. The lights were coming closer. It seemed like they were floating directly towards us, and they made no sound at all. That scared the shit out of me, and I immediately began to panic. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to leave on my own. It was like 2 a.m., I was in an unfamiliar neighborhood with no phone or money, and public transport had stopped running. If my friends wouldn't show me the way back to Bob's house, I had nowhere to go. I stopped looking at the lights at this point because I was more focused on my friends. They were standing there like zombies with their mouths wide open, looking up at the sky. I thought they looked stupid, with their mouths open like that. Then I noticed that my mouth was open too, and I felt like an idiot. I was really whining now. I was begging them to leave with me, but they were hardly responding at all. It was like trying to discuss politics with a gamer while they are wrapped up in a game, or like how people get when they play the pokies. I was barely getting grunts of acknowledgement. This scared me even more, but I saw that I wasn't going to get my way, and I had to make a decision. I thought about how weird it would be to walk away from my friends, with nowhere to go, and I felt lonely. I also thought about how weird it would be to walk away from those lights. It's the most interesting thing I have ever seen, by far, and it was hard not to look at them. I took one more look at my friends' stupid, wide open mouths. Their heads were tipped back now because the lights were almost directly above us. I looked back at the lights, and I surrendered to the situation. That's the last thing I remember clearly. They looked very similar to the Phoenix lights, but with one chopped off the end so that one leg was longer than the other, and they were much closer than any of the photos/footage of the Phoenix lights. I do have a very vague memory of standing with my head tipped back as far as it would go and my mouth wide open as far as possible, and I'm looking at the sky immediately above me. There were no lights, but there's a dark black square object blocking out the stars. It looks heavy, but it's floating, and it's completely silent. It's directly above my head. It seems pretty close, and it takes up almost the whole sky. I felt like I was alone. It's just a flash of memory, and it's vague, and I don't think I remembered it until a long time after it happened, so it's probably not real, but who knows? I don't really talk about this experience, because it makes me sound like a nutcase. I don't even know if I believe it myself. It might have been a hallucination, but it seems weird that all three of us saw the same thing. It might be a false memory, created through the power of suggestion. I was worried about that at the time, and I still can't dismiss the possibility, but it's challenging to accept. The whole thing felt like it took about 2 hours, and I was so deeply engaged with the experience that every thought and feeling, and everything I saw and said, is all burned into my memory. There's also about 5 hours where none of us remember anything. I woke up on a train. I was in some kind of trance, and the ticket inspector, who knew me, woke me up because I was about to miss my stop. I only remembered the lights about 2 hours later, when Bob and Jenny showed up at my house. We were telling my dad about what we had been doing, and Bob said, "Hey, remember the lights?" And then it all came flooding back. It seems a bit sus that I only remembered all of this when somebody reminded me. I was definitely in a hypnotic state throughout the experience. It started when I focused my attention on the lights when they were over the building. And when the ticket inspector woke me up, I was much more deeply hypnotized than I have ever been with a professional hypnotherapist. I know that hypnosis makes people more suggestible, and this makes me wonder if the memory was planted, or accidentally invented by the three of us, or something. It's hard to accept, because the memory is so vivid and it was such a surreal experience, but maybe? I haven't discussed it with Bob since the day after it happened, but Jennifer says he refuses to talk about it. Jennifer talked about it obsessively for a while, and she joined some kind of alien abduction support group. I met them once, when she hosted a meeting. They are all batshit crazy. I have cut ties with them, so I hardly think about it anymore, but I'd love to understand what really happened. Sighting I had more than a decade ago still haunts me. I don't know how to overcome it. How do I seek help? Therapy isn't working. Location, Belo Horizonte, Brazil. Date of sighting, late 2011, cannot recall precise date. Time of sighting, sometime between 0 o'clock and 5 o'clock. Duration of sighting, no longer than 30 seconds, no less than 15 seconds. Number of witnesses, 2. Description of sighting. My single bed, located just below my large bedroom window, had its blackout curtains fully closed. Both of us woke up, very startled and heart racing. It must have been way past midnight. Blinding light is shining through the window. The window that is just above my bed, the single one that leads directly into the street. It makes no sense because the blackout curtains are covering the glass completely, and yet the light just passes through it. This annoying sound keeps echoing in my head, hitting my skull like a nail, drilling my ears exactly like those 90s tube TVs turning on used to make, and I didn't know where it was coming from, nor did it seem important given the blinding brightness I was experiencing. I jump out of bed and turn around to face the window. My girlfriend is also standing on the other side of the bed, looking at the closed curtains, visibly shaken. With one leg standing with feet on the floor and the other bent over the bed, I reach for the drapery of the curtains that cover the window just above our pillows. At no moment did I have a discernible thought in mind, I was just reacting. In a quick motion, I spread apart the drape to see what is happening outside. The brilliance gets even brighter, engulfing all of the bedroom. I can't see anything, it's simply too bright. It felt as if there was a stadium floodlight just outside the window. In reflex, I use my hand to cover some of the light that stings my eyes a little bit. The framing of the windows is made of wood that connects small 4x6 glass panels, and I sway my head in an attempt to block the source of light in a way that whatever is shining can be better seen or understood, even if a little. I still don't know if my eyes adjusted to the brightness or if the light dimmed gradually, but I was eventually able to see it. At exactly 40 feet from my window, on the other side of the street, just by the curb, in front of a gated land lot, just below a street lamp, and hovering about 2 or 3 feet above the ground. It was a soft, glowing object that looked like an egg that was turned on its side and made of light. Its glow was a milky, white bright in its core but had a bluish-purplish glow on its outer rim. On the larger side of the egg, I noticed a lump, not big enough to be considered a dome or sphere, but a subtle elliptical protrusion. It wasn't hovering still.
It moved in the same place in a disturbing flickering pattern, as if it was trying to move on the X, Y, and Z axes very, very quickly and in short lengths, as one would portray something that feels either unstable or an engine about to blow up.
I've described its movement pattern as film grain. The clarity coming from the light pole just above it made the thing cast a barely visible shadow on the street. My girlfriend is sobbing intensely in despair, tears running down her face, slobbering. I feel cold in my gut and neck, as if my heart stopped. My mind is blank. There's nothing on it, I can only describe it as a dark empty space. The fear I felt was a void that restrained me, something I had never experienced in my life. It had a familiar metallic phantom smell that a concussion would cause in me. I stood there looking at that, without a single rational response, just droplets of cold sweat I felt running down my forehead. I felt like a deer must be watching the headlights of a 10-ton truck aiming at me, not understanding that my fate was sealed but knowing the hopelessness of it. I wasn't there, I wasn't in control. I was so little, so disempowered, I was nothing. Whatever it was so much more than I. That's when I feel a hand touching my shoulders. It's my girlfriend? There's something wrong with her face, I cannot quite figure out what. I think it is her, but I cannot see her. There is a swirling darkness covering her facial features, almost like a black tornado seen from above. I can't see her, but she is not weeping uncontrollably anymore. Everything is now becoming hazy. She speaks. Close the curtain, let's go to sleep. As if a switch was turned off, those animalistic, raw, unconscious feelings that were pulsating within me disappeared. I still am not thinking, I still am not in control, but I don't feel anything anymore. Slowly I turned towards the window, closed the curtains, lay in bed with my face and belly upwards, and slept instantaneously because the dark came immediately. I don't think I've ever fallen asleep so fast in my life, let alone in such an unorthodox position. All of these events happened in 15 seconds or 30 seconds. It appeared to be very, very quick. We woke up at the same time on the next day, a Sunday. Something was different. I tried not to make eye contact and realized she was also avoiding it, side-eyeing me. My mind is slower than usual, even for Sunday standards. I still recalled everything and wanted to talk about it, but I didn't quite feel like it. It was on my mind, I remembered it perfectly, the waking up, the brightness, the shutting down, and yet I didn't dwell on it. I rationalized that it's for the better, I don't want to make her feel uncomfortable about sleeping in my house. After 10 minutes, I simply forgot about the whole event as if it was just another terrible dream. But it sure wasn't. My dreams consist of shifting colors, fantastical lengths, and absurdist narratives that make no sense in real life with lots of different people in them. This dream was very real. I woke up and went to sleep within the same dream. I went to sleep and woke up the next morning in the same place. All the colors, textures, and shapes were correspondent to reality. It was just me and the person I went to sleep with, and I could recall it from start to finish. Unsettling, but the experience didn't linger in my mind. It fades as if it didn't happen. To this day I cannot understand why I felt this apathy towards such a traumatic experience that had just occurred. Fast forward a couple of years or so. It's January 2014. I was watching the morning news, and a story came up about a UFO causing the airport in Bremen, Germany, to stop all traffic. I didn't even remember that I saw something like that, and it all came back to me. The entire event is now suddenly a memory. Whatever was filmed in here looks just like the thing I saw outside my bedroom window, but with a bluish outer rim instead of purplish. I feel scared and really confused. I decided to talk with my girl about what happened. She remembers. She says she remembers waking up that one night, with a dazzling light coming through the curtains and the terribly annoying noise. She doesn't remember anything else after that, no strange glowing object, no touching my shoulder, no telling me to close the curtains, and no sleeping. She only remembers the moment of waking up. It ducked me up in several ways that I find difficult to describe. I was unable to look outside my window for weeks because it would make me recall the incident. I had trouble sleeping, often pulling all-nighters and only being able to sleep after sunrise. I got used to waking up several times during the night, feeling I was being watched. The only time in my entire life I've ever prayed was to make the feeling that this thing was still around go away. I can't prove to myself that it was just a weird dream, and I can't prove it was real either. It's an experience that walks between fantasy and reality in the worst possible way. Creeping in everything that I do, the lingering feeling of being powerless or doubting myself reappears. I've told this event to my brother. First of all, realistically, that did not happen. What are the chances it happened to you, of all people? You, who studied UFOs almost your entire life. Secondly, I was sleeping in the bedroom just beside yours. Why didn't you scream, maybe take a picture? I know you would. And lastly, it was a light. I know you, how would just a bright light scare my big brother? He is 100% correct. I keep revisiting this experience, year after year after year, in hopes of remembering or recovering more information, maybe feeling differently about it. I went to therapy because of this trauma and still do. I just cannot let it go. It is as if a pact I made with myself, that nothing like this would ever happen, was broken, and now I distrust myself. I've read enough on similar cases to believe that there won't ever be an explanation for this event, but I really want a resolution. I really want to overcome it, and I do not know how. My recollection of these events occurred 10 years ago, and nothing remotely similar to this window incident ever happened again. I and my ex-GF are still friends, and although we both moved to different countries, we sometimes still message each other. More than once I asked her if that really happened. She always replies, "It did. I'm sorry it did. I cannot explain it, but it happened." Alien encounter, lost time in a strange fog. The experience described below was written by Matt, a friend of mine that has been working with me for quite a few years now. Over this time he's been practicing very strongly, engaging with all the perceptual input of current and past experiences to become aware of and to more deeply understand the subtle perceptions and below conscious awareness perceptions that we are all picking up but are largely ignoring all the time. We are all a lot more sensitive all the time than anyone is aware of. We simply don't engage with all of our senses or perceptions or the very comprehensive memories of our past perceptions either. We have 5 physical senses, but I am now aware of over a dozen more senses that are always functioning in the background. Modern society is also very noisy, so the background static drowns out a lot of subtle, barely conscious perceptions. It took me literally a decade of spending a few hours a day orienting myself to what was happening within myself before I could start to consciously engage with a much wider variety of perceptions as well as the memories of these than most considered aware people are not even aware of. So, what is written below happened to Matt as he was driving from Michigan to California across the country with a friend in the summer of 2008. He didn't begin to write about this experience until 2012, when he was simultaneously becoming increasingly aware that he'd been continuously perceptually living out having what can only be described as a happening in the background alien abduction experience. This was a phase where Matt had been waking up feeling that while he'd been sleeping, he was aware of being somewhere else and of being subjected to experiments. A year later, in 2013, Matt, now even more in touch with his subliminal perceptions, greatly expanded upon the original version of the experience, which is what is written below. I was driving cross-country with a friend, driving from Michigan to California. We had been driving for a day or so and by now had gotten very tired. So tired, in fact, that we were not really paying attention to the scenery. We were not really concerned with paying much attention to the roads. We were just watching for signs and making sure we did not miss the turnoffs and direction changes on our route along the way as we wanted to reach the city where we'd reserved a motel room before it got too late. We had gotten some way through the Midwest of America, making our way through the sparsely populated farmland-type states. It was now some way into the night, and we were nowhere near a major city. However, as we had been driving through relatively flat and uninteresting areas, we were both surprised to come over a certain spot that distinctly opened up into remarkably different scenery. There were hills and foggy bottoms. I remember coming over the hill, we both kind of looked at each other as if to acknowledge this new development. I remember that the fog that blanketed the roadside to the right and left almost seemed to clump across the roadway at particular parts of our drive. This unsettling night fog grew thicker as we drove past rolling hills. It seemed to settle thick and palpably on the highway and caused us to shake off our tiredness as we were now both concerned for our safety. My friend was driving, and I was looking hard at the fog as a second pair of eyes. We both felt that we should try to keep driving as quickly as we could to make it to our destination, but given the limited visibility, over time we slowed to maybe 35 to 40 miles an hour. Somehow driving at this speed on the highway in that night made it feel almost as if time had stopped and that we were just sliding through this fog. At this point we both started to notice the strange and eerie feeling that we had while driving. The slow, smooth speed of the car and the strange patchy fog made us both feel that we were being hemmed in and that not only was it dangerous to keep driving on the highway, but we just felt plain odd. All of this put together caused us to begin talking about the strange weather outside and the eerie feeling we had. Over the course of a few minutes, we started to compare stories about spooky times, and at this point, we were both feeling our skins was electrically charged with energy, tingly like the way you feel when someone tells about a ghost story, déjà vu, or eerie coincidence. It had built up to the point where the fog was so thick, it was almost yellowish, and it seemed to have settled over the road and the land more like a thick blanket than any fog I can ever remember. Being specifically directed to drive to where the alien is waiting. It was at this point that we both got a profound feeling that we should stop at a particular exit. I was literally scared of staying on the highway and scared of going off, but somehow we both felt we should exit. I think that I kind of suggested it as calmly as I could, and my friend who was driving agreed. As we pulled off the highway, we felt relieved, I think, to be done with highway driving in this thick fog. It seemed to cut the palpable tension that had been building over the last few minutes when we had really been acknowledging how strange, otherworldly, and spooky the fog and scenery were. However, as we began to drive, we started to drive down a country road that became increasingly more frightening. I remember that my arms had goose pimples with all the hairs standing on end, and my heart began to race even more than before. I momentarily wondered if I had made a mistake advising us to get off the highway and if we were doing the wrong thing by continuing to drive. After a few miles we saw a fork in the road and both felt we should take the turn onto it. It was an even smaller road that branched off this already isolated country road. As we drove, things got eerier and eerier, the fog got thicker. Eventually we hit what felt to be an invisible wall of energy that literally stopped the car in its tracks. I would not say that it was shimmering at the time, but the wave of energy that hits me even now as I remember it makes me feel that there was in fact something like a shimmering wall of energy there that stopped us dead in our tracks. The memory almost feels as if it's locked in my spine and came out as shock/fear energy when I remembered it again while writing this story. Unlocking this memory almost feels like a bubble that is popped with other feelings spilling out. As I remember the shimmering wall, I can also remember that the tree branches in front of where we stopped did not move in the correct way with the wind. There definitely seemed to be something there, a presence or force that was really seriously fierce and was something to be reckoned with. It was not like a kitty ghost story, it was a very adult feeling of a dark intruder, a dark lurker. As I remember this now, I also feel that there was a distinct presence that was visible but also not visible, like a shadow figure. I do not remember seeing lights that were red or green, but if I place that image overlay on the memory I do have, then it feels as if it's hiding just beneath the surface. What I mean is that if I actually feel back into the memory, I get a frightening image of some kind of thing that is vaguely concealed, dark, metallic, with small red and green LED type lights. In fact, in writing this, I almost get a visceral sense it is back with me in this room, which is quite frightening and makes me feel like I won't be able to sleep tonight. I am almost hesitant to write this, but seeing as how I almost did not keep this in my memory and it was hidden until I really felt back into it and the blocked memory bubble burst, I think I should write it in case others have had this experience of feeling something is there and even observing it in their memory or mind's eye, as I am not sure if this is caused by some kind of alien cloaking presentation. Memory perception fuzziness around scary hidden cloaked alien encounter. Basically, my gut knew something was there and was watching us and was not something to be F and ed with. All of this happened in a few seconds, I feel, at least my initial impression and being hit in the gut with this. Strangely, however, I did not want to flee and turn around, although part of me did, I felt somehow compelled to push through it. It reminds me of situations at night where someone is walking close to me and I brace myself to not act scared because showing intimidation or fear would make anyone with any negative intent all the more brazen with you. It was almost like I was committed down one line, and showing my lack of fear and intent towards that spot would be the only way that I would be safe. That was how it felt. As we hit this wall, we just stopped the car. We did not bother to pull off the road or park in the grass off to the side. At this point my memory starts to get a bit hazy. In the same way, I feel that a bubble had burst while trying to remember. I also feel a hazy, dampening overlay beginning at the time when I get out of the car. It is almost as if our consciousness was being depressed so that we could not really perceive well or feel into this obviously invisible wall that in reality we had just run up against. What I do remember clearly is that at this point we were somewhat frightened, but as young guys, we both internally had the sense that we'd try to be men about it and get out and check out what was going on. At this phase in my life, I'd had more experience with odd things than my friend, so I got out first and felt the energy wall hit me. I think if I am honest, internally, in feeling more back into it, I got out to prove to whatever was there that I would not be intimidated in hopes that showing a display of courage and intent toward it would put it off. What is very weird about this is that I don't have a clear memory of getting out of the car or where we walked in terms of where I ended up standing and where my friend stood. However, I feel that I ended up in front and to the left of my friend, who was near the driver's side door. So somehow I walked around the front of the car, but I don't remember doing this really. I think that we must have stood there for a while in this position, me out in front of the car and my friend almost clutching alongside the car. However, my exact position and his position are somehow foggy, like the hazy overlay I mentioned before. I can feel that the flow of time was somehow not right when we were actually there. I can remember stopping, hitting the wall, having the gut feeling, and getting out, and then I remember coming out of it sometime later. I would say it was only a few minutes or so that we stood there, but to be honest, I'm not sure. At this point I came out, or broke out, of the lost time, mental haze combination. What I mean by this is that it hit me, like a gut feeling that actually shocked my energy field/being, that whatever was going on in this location was seriously weird, unusual, not normal, and that it felt as if the fog was being made to be blanketing this area for a very particular reason. The feeling was that the fog was all around us, closing in, and that it was concentrated at the specific location where we were standing. It felt as if we were in a hurricane of energy, or some force, and we had found and were close to the center emanating and hidden point. It felt as if this center point was about 15 feet or so in front of us, close to a tree that felt as if there was something not right about it. It was a relatively large/mature tree that was along a fence that bordered the road. Has anyone else met them? Multidimensional entity. This happened to me in July this year, and I've been thinking about it constantly since. I'll try to sum up the experience as best I can. So, I'm kind of a mentally ill weirdo. As a 24-year-old girl with BPD and CPTSD, I live alone in the city, pursuing my own interests. I have a few friends but I'm not close with my family. It's not unusual for me to go a few weeks or months without really seeing anyone besides coworkers, especially during a globalized pandemic, so I've just been doing my own thing. This encounter happened during one of those few week-long stretches of isolation. I'm only giving this bit of exposition so people can understand my psych history as well as my mental state, etc. So, at the start of July, I got this uncontrollable impulse to go camping and stargazing. I never go camping alone, haven't been in around 4 years, and had no camping shit whatsoever. But I wanted to go for some reason, so I researched some good dark sky spots in Utah, found a cute little campground about 4 hours into the desert, and reserved the last spot available for a week out from that day. I bought all my stuff the day before and just drove out. I'm horrible at planning and time management, so by the time I arrived at the campground, the sun was already going down. I also had forgotten my charger and realized I had to make my 60% battery last until I could make it back to the city the next day. Since there was no service available, that seemed like a reasonable solution. My entire goal was to chill in my hammock chair all night and stargaze anyway, so all I needed was some music for that. I specifically chose the night of a new moon for this, so I knew I had to get my tent set up and situated ASAP before the sun went down. There are a lot of others here, but most are families with kids getting ready for bed. Could hear parents reading scripture to their kids before bed, ducking Mormons, and could see others reading on Kindles and stuff before sleeping. By the time everything is set up, it's about 10 p.m. Everyone almost at once turns their lights off and passes out. This really weirded me out at first because it was the perfect night for stargazing. I didn't see a single other person setting up a chair to stargaze, any telescopes, or even just someone outside of their tent looking up. Everyone was either already asleep or going to sleep. I gave it some more thought and figured they all probably just want to wake up before or with the sunrise because we are in the desert. Sleeping in wouldn't exactly be a pleasant experience when you're getting cooked alive, I imagine. I worked night shift, so staying up was not an issue in the slightest bit. So at this point, the only people I can see that are awake are myself, this family at the campground vaguely near me reading scripture, and a whole mess of people at the bathroom. My tent is located at the far side of the campground, so to my left is nothing but desert and cliff. In front of me is the bathroom, about 100 feet or so away, 2 other campgrounds, about 300 feet away, and more desert/sky. To my right, and behind me, is the rest of the campground. There's another bathroom on the far side of the campground behind me to my right, which is probably around 700 to 900 feet away. These 2 bathrooms are the only source of any light in the campground aside from a few people who are using their flashlights to come to and from the bathroom. Like I said earlier, I'm a weirdo. I won't deny that. This makes it difficult for me to honestly share my story with others. So my goal out here was to grieve and to move on from a lot of loss I experienced a year ago. A lot of awful stuff happened in my life, and I lost a lot of loved ones as a result. Sometimes, a good mushroom trip will really help one find a lot of closure when it comes to grief, so that was my only goal this trip. I ate around 2 grams and was coming up around 11 p.m. Now, hear me out here. What kind of ducking close encounter story can be believed when the person telling it was under the influence of a psychedelic, you might be asking? That's a good ducking question, and I would say that being skeptical of a person's experience under the influence of such drugs is common sense. That being said, I want to say I have a gross amount of experience with psychedelics, some trips in even weirder and more isolated places than this. I've tripped on mushrooms easily dozens of times in my life, and on acid probably over 100 times. I have kept tons of trip journals, recorded trips, etc., and never once has anything like this happened to me before or since. I have never seen things while tripping, have never interacted with entities, and have never had thoughts or paranoia about something being there that's not. I always have the same trips, which is some textures get wavy, my emotions become full and bright, and I feel at peace in my mind for those few hours finally. That's it. I'm convinced that what happened to me in the desert was not a product of the drugs but merely happened to me while I was tripping. It would have been the same had I not been on psychedelics. But that's just my opinion. I definitely do invite skepticism otherwise. So yeah, I'm coming up and I'm ready to stargaze. I gotta pee, though, and all these people hanging out around the bathroom are making me nervous. No one else is awake that I can see now, no lights are on or tents open anywhere around me. The only people still awake are all over by the bathroom. I eventually cave and just head over and do my thing. No one bothered me or said anything to me, luckily. I start walking back over to my chair, so, my spot is pretty close to the bathroom. I can walk from the front of it in a straight line in the dark, and I will, without fail, hit my tent after about 25 seconds of walking. Because it's this easy, I don't bother whipping my flashlight out to get there. Plus saving my phone battery for the drive out is still my priority anyway. I'm walking through the dark when I see the outline of my hammock chair and a person standing right next to it, staring at it. I freeze and stare at them. I'm super confused as to why this person is in my camp spot, standing alone in the dark, just staring at my chair. Maybe they are curious about it? I don't know. It's weird. AF. I wave at them, but they don't notice, so I move a little closer, and I guess the sound of my footsteps alerted them to my presence, because they shot their head up towards me, took around 3 steps in my direction, backed up about 6 steps, flashed a bluish flashlight in my eyes, and fast walked away from me towards another person I hadn't noticed either standing in the dark around 15 feet from us. They both stand next to each other, shining their blue flashlights at their feet, and they both move around me towards the bathroom and disappear into the girls' restroom. Ducking weird, right? I thought so, standing there all terrified like a dumb shit. I rationalized that the first person must have been waiting for their friend to catch up or something. I sit down and finally put on some good music in my headphones and just melt into the beautiful show playing in the sky above. It's now around 11:30 to midnight, and there are still people ducking around near the women's restroom. It's actually just really distracting at this point and bugging me a lot because it's right in my line of sight. They just keep waving their flashlights around and coming in and out, but they never seem to go anywhere. They will walk out of the restroom, turn their lights off, and just walk into the dark without their lights to guide them. They usually will either walk behind the bathroom, where I can't see them, or off to the left side into the dark where there are no camp spots. I notice someone is standing next to me. I tear my headphones out and shoot my head to my right. There is a silhouette of a person standing about 7 feet from my chair. I find myself frozen and extremely frightened. They take around 2 or 3 steps towards me, then back up again around 6, and walk around me and away into the dark with no flashlight, away from me and the bathroom. Now I'm ducking spooked. I don't think it's anything supernatural right now, but I definitely think it's some people up to no good. The nearest city is hundreds of miles away, and we are far from any civilization out here. If these were people trying to hurt me, they could do it rather easily. I stay in the chair for now, but I keep my headphones off so I can hear the environment around me. My head is now on a swivel, but I'm still trying my best to enjoy the night. Now, it's midnight. And no one else is awake. There are no flashlights in sight, no voices to be heard, nothing. All the bathroom people finally vanished, and it was just me awake as far as I could tell. With my headphones off, I started to notice sounds now. The sound of a jet somewhere near would come and go, flying around somewhere in the desert. I kept looking for its aircraft lights but could never find them. This deep, almost physics-defying boom would occasionally shake the desert, but in a weird way. When I heard and felt it, I would feel my body tense and shake with it, and the air too. But never the ground. It's weird, because it sounded as if it was coming from the ground itself, not the air. I would hear what also sounded like laughter coming from the desert to my left. The portion of desert with no camp spots or people. I'm still at this point, just chilling. I'm obviously starting to suspect some weird shit, but for the most part I'm chilling and enjoying the night. Subsequently, orbs appeared in the sky. I practically shit myself when I saw this. Above one of the cliffs far out on the horizon, this little swarm of glowing orbs had appeared, and they were almost dancing around one another. I remember this moment very, very clearly. I remember seeing them, thinking, I can't explain that. What the duck is that? There is nothing I could imagine could move like that, not even drones. I won't record this, I promise. It would ruin it, and I want to see it through. I remember thinking that last part very clearly out of nowhere and thought it was weird how specific it was in my mind. I hadn't even thought to record it in the first place as I had just noticed it, but here I was making a promise to myself that I wouldn't even try no matter what would happen. Another cluster of orbs appears in the sky to my right, and almost simultaneously the orbs to my left instantly shoot across the sky to join the other orbs. I start smiling like a ducking idiot. This is it, the thing I have been staring at the sky looking for my whole goddamn life. The thing I stopped believing in for decades because I never saw it. I had let the world convince me that it was just as boring as it appeared and never once allowed myself to think it could actually be more than that. And the proof of that was finally ducking staring me in the face. I had to keep checking in with myself, being like, this isn't the shrooms, right? No, it's definitely not. I see that, and I know I'm not hallucinating it. It probably went through that little personal questioning close to a dozen times over the course of the next few minutes. The jet sound comes back, and it's much louder now. I can actually see the aircraft lights now too. They are flying directly overhead, but they aren't blinking like usual. They fly into this dark cloud in the sky I hadn't noticed before and vanish along with the jet's sound. The orbs continue playing around each other until they vanish too. All in all, I'd say this lasted for like an hour. It's now around 1 a.m., and I really got a ducking pee. I obviously hold it as long as I can because I'm witnessing the single most special thing I'll ever get to see right in front of my eyes, but eventually I break and just want to get it over with. So, I'm a trans woman. I wouldn't even bring that up if it didn't have some sort of relevancy to the story, TBH. I look and sound exactly like a girl. It's pretty much impossible for people to tell I'm not cis and haven't been clocked in a long time, but I still have a pee. I'm out here in the ducking desert on shrooms, witnessing some high strangeness, but I still gotta be careful of what bathroom I use. Normally I would just use the girls, but those people I encountered earlier were still making me paranoid, so I figured if worse comes to worse, I'd rather be caught in the men's in case there are some weirdos out here. I head in there and I'm doing my thing at the urinal as fast as possible. I zip down and start going. The ducking goddamn moment I start the door to the restroom, it shoots the duck open, and some guy with short brown hair, around 5 feet 6 inches, and a half sunken, droopy face runs in, eyes glued to the ground, and barges into the stall next to me, shutting the door and doing his biz. The only word I could use to describe him was sick. This obviously scares the duck out of me. It's like 1 a.m., and I haven't seen another human being in a few hours, and I just noticed the light show in the sky, and I'm a cis-looking girl peeing ducking standing up at a urinal, and I'm alone with this dude. He pees for no joke. 3 seconds. That's it. All that rush, all that urgency, for 3 seconds of tinkle time. Who does that? He spent the rest of his time in there slowly pulling out toilet paper from the roller for some reason. I'm a dumb shit and just held my bladder for way too long, so I'm trying my ducking best to just get it all out so I can leave, but it's taking forever. I finally finish, and for some reason go to wash my hands. It just felt like the right thing to do in the moment. Lamau. The guy shoots out of the stall again way too hard and fast, comes in right next to me at the sink, washes his hands for a total of 2 seconds, and leaves the bathroom as fast as he entered. I'm just kind of shook. But again, I'm trying to rationalize this. I just think he's probably tripping too, and the sight of some girl peeing at the urinal at 1 a.m. undoubtedly made him think I was an alien too. Lamau. So, I head out and back to my chair. The moment I sit down, the lights in the bathroom I was just in shut off all at once. The lights in the girls' bathroom and the boys'. No one enters or leaves either, and now just a single tiny yellow bulb can be seen glowing above a park ranger's bulletin board on the side of the building. I sit down and almost kind of invite more weird shit to happen around me. The jets are back now, and louder than before. There are orbs now, huge rings around the campground pulsating and growing, and then dimming, slowly drifting around. I'm terrified, but also I can't move. It's too ducking cool, TBH. That's really the whole reason I didn't hide in my tent. Who the duck in their right mind would listen to their instinct to run when you could see how far it could go? I hear weirder sounds coming from the desert. It sounds like shouting and a baby crying far, far away. The orbs reappear in the sky, and behind the trees next to my tent, it looks like the moon is shining through, but it's a new moon. It's now 2 a.m. The bathroom lights come back on, but only the lights in the men's restroom. The women remain off, and I see no one come or go. At this point, the only thing that can be heard coming from my mouth the past little bit is, I'm a dumb shit. Why am I doing this? This is terrifying, and I'm dumb for just letting it happen. I'm very aware of my desire to run and give in to the fear, but that is highly outweighed by my curiosity. At least it was. A person who comes from seemingly nowhere, with no flashlight on and no clear intention of direction, walks in front of the bathroom, and it's terrifying. Normally, that isn't ducking scary. It's just some person. But, this person was easily 10 to 13 feet tall. The bathroom itself was around 13 feet tallish, and this person walking in front of it had their head at mid-level with the top ventilation window, and the crown of their head was taller than the building itself. They walked in front of the restroom, and into the dark, and I shot out of my chair. The only thing I said was, nope, 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 ducking nope, that's my line. Duck you, duck you, duck you, that's terrifying. Nope, ducking nope. Alternatively, it could have been something else entirely. As fast as I could, I ran into my tent and quickly zipped it up. There was no not running at this point. My sympathetic nervous system just went all over, and I was very adamant that I needed to ducking hide. It's difficult to describe what I felt, but it was the most primal fear I've ever felt. I have BPD and CPTSD, so I am used to feeling a staggering amount of terror in my mind on a daily basis when my symptoms show up. But this was on a whole other level. It was like some deep animal part of me understood the moment I saw them that I was no longer at the top of the food chain. Another ultra predator, much, much smarter than me, had just made itself known, and my body was tensing up like a wild animal at the sight of it. I felt truly humbled and small in that moment and knew I was outmatched. They were now outside of my tent and were scurrying in non-circles around it. The sound of their footsteps gave way to the feeling of their voice playing side by side with my own inner voice. This is where it gets challenging to explain. We talked, but talking is not the right word for it. They communicate in pure concept and feeling, and it's so subtle and instantaneous it's hard to describe how obvious it is while at the same time being so subtle as to almost be indistinguishable from your own thoughts or feelings. The things we talked about were rather personal, so I won't go into too much detail. I asked them about the jets, whether that was us and if we were trying to find them. They said yes. I thought we weren't smart enough to find you guys. They said no, you are smart. You just aren't creative. They said they are scared of us too but are much more aware of us than them. They want to know us more, but it's hard. The complexity of the situation is overwhelming. It cited me running and hiding as proof. I said, that's natural. I'm still an animal with a nervous system hardwired towards survival. Something new and unknown is going to do that to people no matter how rational they try to stay. They said they liked me because I was honest about the fear. They were scared too. They want freedom, and they want that for us too. But they aren't quite sure what to do. Or at least, they wouldn't tell me. Whenever I would ask their name or why they were here, they would deliberately ignore me. They also seemed to get a kick out of ducking with me, also citing that as a reason for this. They did one thing that I really liked, and it was to show me they have always cared and always will. It's hard to describe the feeling they gave me, but it really was unconditional love. They called me family and kept expressing their love for me and told me that I chose this. I didn't get that part all too well. When they said that to me, all these memories flooded in from my childhood, but I'm still struggling to draw any connections. After a while I, of course, had to pee again. I did, and nothing happened. I went back into my tent to eat some trail mix and to record an audio recording of what we just talked about so I could remember as much as possible, and I noticed the time on my phone said something like 11 a.m. My phone has never ducked up like that before and changed the time on me. It was a little validating to see, TBH. It was very clearly the middle of the night, not 11 a.m. I left the tent, and they ducked with me some more. More orbs in the trees, lights going off in the bathroom, etc. Eventually, 5 a.m. hit, and they were gone. The sun came up, and I headed home. There are a lot of details I skipped over, as this is already way too long, but there you have it. Like I said, I don't expect anyone to believe me. I welcome the skepticism honestly, as I was under the influence of a psychedelic substance. I do have to say, out of the hundreds of trips I've had, I've never experienced something like this before or since. I truly believe that these events happened and that the drugs were not responsible for their inception whatsoever. To be honest, I'm not sure what to take away from it. It was amazing, and I want to meet them again. I am extremely humbled now. I believe in other beings again and have this sense of family and home in myself I've never quite had before. Has anyone out there met them too? I'd love to hear your story if so, and to let you know you aren't alone in your experience. They are out there, and they do exist.